on Twitch. We should be on YouTube, both at the same time. And I'll be looking at my phone periodically because I need to make sure that I am on the correct place. Hi, everybody. Lovely to see you all again. It's been so long since I've been live. It's been a whole 10 minutes since I was last live. And we are here with the lovely people of the audio drama space. Please introduce yourselves, I guess, in order of alphabetical order, I guess. Go ahead.
Oh, that makes me go first, I think.
Yes.
It took me a minute to work that out. I'm Eira. I make shows under the moniker Hanging Sloth. Currently releasing Remnants and Not Quite Dead. And yeah, I use he, they pronouns.
Hello, I'm Ella. My pronouns are she, her, and oh man, what do I even do? I'm like a writer-director. I made a show called Camlann, which is my biggest indie show. I also made a show called Doctor Who Redacted, which is probably my biggest like commercial show. And then my day job is I'm head of production for Zombies Run and Marvel Move.
Yes.
Hello, I'm Hero. They, them. And I make Monstrous Productions shows. That's my brand, I guess. So Monstrous Agonies is probably the most famous and the most relevant to this stream, which was a weekly late night radio show for monsters. And we're currently releasing Traveling Light, which is sort of cozy sci-fi. Exploring the universe and meeting aliens and eating bread together, that kind of thing.
Eating bread. That's amazing. That's so
There's
good.
a lot of bread.
That's very good. I accidentally took us off full screen for a second. I panicked and you didn't hear it, but it's fine. So I'm Watsi. I am the one hosting this this conversation. I am the creator of She Her, and I am the creator of Hainai, which is a horror podcast with a Filipino immigrant and dealing with supernatural threats in Toronto. And we are currently fundraising for Hainai Act 3, the rest of Hainai Act 3. This one we're actually aiming, because we actually hit our 100%, which is wonderful. Everyone supported it. It was so good. I'm very happy. So we're still coming back on February 2, but we want to hit 125% so that we can release a wonderful bonus episode about a aged immortal who is very dangerous and used to be very evil, but is now just tired. And this lovely normal guy with the warmest heart you'll ever know, this trans man barista who is in love with him. And so that will be a nice belated Christmas episode for everybody. Them walking through a winter village together, and that is something I really want to make sure everyone gets to hear if we hit 125%. So I have dropped the donate link in the chat, and I hope you all consider getting us to 125. We are currently at 107, so we are on our way, and we are that much closer to this adorable romance, which will be the last cute and not sad episode you'll have in a while. So appreciate it, because it's not going to be like that for a long time. That's a threat.
One of the things that I'm enjoying about this is realizing, like, Motzi, how similar you are as an artist to Eira.
Which will be the last.
It's like, first of all, like, he's got a show with a really old, tired immortal who used to be evil but is now just tired, who has, like, a thing with a younger guy. But also, like, that both you and Eira are like, we'll give you, like, one cute queer romance thing, and then we will just make you sad forever.
Yes. It's the glee at making your audience suffer.
That's going to be the best part. Listen, we love our adorable queer romances, and we love our pain and suffering and horror, so that's always gonna be a big part of what we do. And okay, so just to keep time, although we do have 3 hours, but some of you do have to like go a little earlier. So we will be talking about mythology and folklore today, because each one of us does audio drama, but also has special interests or audio dramas or stories or things to talk about with mythology and folklore. And we are gonna kind of go in a sort of with a couple of questions, and everyone can kind of jump in. Whoever is interested in answering the question first can go in, and then we can kind of like, go around the room. My first question is, what folklore or mythology relates to your podcast, and in what way, so that we can learn a little more about each of our podcasts and why we're talking about folklore and mythology today. So who wants to go first?
I'll go first because mine's the least specific. Monstrous Agonies covered pretty much anything, really. So one of the things with Monstrous Agonies was that we took submissions from our listeners. So I didn't necessarily sit down and go, oh, I'd really like to write an episode about, about a vampire or about this or about that. It was our listeners writing in and being like, I want Mothman to be asexual, so here's my submission about that, and then I would write from that. So I think the only things that I was like, this doesn't count for Monstrous Agonies was like aliens. I was like, we're not having aliens. We will have mad scientists, that's allowed, and we'll have like some like experiments gone wrong, and we had one or two, I think maybe two AIs who had gone crazy, but like it was mostly like ghosts and demons and succubuses and vampires and werewolves and just anything that people threw at me. I was like, let's go. Sure, why not?
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So I went first because it was the least complicated. Just everything. Just yes to all of the above.
It's like, it reminds me of my favorite, one of my favorite Night Vale quotes, how could you pick one, of there's a thin line between weird and beautiful and it's covered in jellyfish. It's just like, really, like, where is the line between like aliens and AI and mad scientists? Where is the semantic line here for monsters? Like, I really enjoy that you had to like actually walk that.
Yeah, genuinely. And you're just like, well, I mean, because I was like, if it was an alien who got frozen ages ago, I think we might allow that. Like if it was like the thing, maybe.
Yeah.
But if they had just crash landed, like E.T. is not a member of the creature community, but the thing might be.
And E.T. is a member of like their home's creature community.
Yeah.
It also like makes me think of I call it the Dead by Daylight effect because I've been playing Dead by Daylight, but it's like because they take franchise monsters. Like they're all monsters, but or killers, I guess. But like every single killer under the sun, like this one's a person, this one's an alien, this one's an actual like horrific amalgamation of souls that are all suffering. This one is really freaky, and nobody knows how to talk about it.
Yeah, I think really like the crux of it for me was like, does this feel like a story archetype? Because we actually had like a two-parter that was about these people who were just each other's nemesis, and they were sort of vaguely like criminal mastermind coded, I guess, and they were like hunting down like artifacts or something. It was all very vague. The whole show is very vague. But it was like these aren't monsters. These are people. They're just doing sort of silly fantasy stuff in a way that feels like it works. So I really think it was more a like I think like the mythology of Monstrous Agonies is a lot like that quote about pornography, where it's like, I can't describe it, but I know it when I see it.
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a great definition of like mythology and folklore, full stop, to be honest. And folk culture. Also, I have to say, there is a joke somewhere in there about the fact that it was a late night call-in show about sex and relationships, and that people had to submit their thoughts, but like I can't put it together. So, audience, like, I'm crowdfunding this joke. Imagine a joke, something to do with submission. Anyway.
They had to submit. That's good. And I guess, like, who wants to talk about their podcast next? Go ahead.
I mean, my shows range kind of from that sort of very nebulous idea of mythology and engaging with it in that sort of light way, where I'm picking out of things, like a variety of things, and using references to stuff. Remnants, I suppose, is the most disjointed from any kind of singular idea of mythology. It's got enough going on. If I started trying to engage with specific mythologies with it, I think we'd get lost in the weeds very quickly. Spirit Box Radio is kind of, it's very interested in meetings of various like pagan mythologies and neo-witchcraft mythologies and actual traditional Celtic mythologies as well as Christian mythologies, and it's really interested in blending those and making them speak to each other. And then Clockwork Bird is like kind of, it's mythological in shape, I would say, because it's a soft retelling of Frankenstein. And then my most specific engagement with mythology is Not Quite Dead, which is a show about vampires in which I get incredibly hyper specific and annoyed about how vampires work. And that's the show.
I love
It's a
that.
good time. It's also like, I think like I very much enjoy how both of you, Hero and Eira, like present your shows or like do all the box, because that kind of stuff I'm terrible at. But I have to say I particularly enjoy, like, Eira has like a very different online presence for each of his shows. So like Remnants is quite literary and it's really smart and philosophical and it's thinking about all this stuff. And then with Not Quite Dead, you're just fully just like absolutely on blast Twilight sex jokes. Here is a picture of a fruit that I'm trying to make look like a butt with a bite taken out of it. Like,
but literally, when I'm making marketing for Not Quite Dead, if you can mistake it at first as Twilight, like a Twilight cover or something, and then if you squint close, you go, "Is that porn?" That's really what I'm aiming for with the Not Quite Dead marketing. I think my real win with that was the Sexy Fruit campaign, all of which is about to be recirculated.
Tell me. Tell us more about the Sexy Fruit campaign. It's so important.
Yeah.
Tell us more. What was the Sexy Fruit campaign?
I had loads of high-res images of fruit on black backgrounds, you know, like a la Twilight's first cover with the hands and the apple, you know.
Yeah.
That's the first Twilight cover. So I had like, there was an apple, there was like anything like red or red shades of fruit. I'll find you some examples. But yeah, and then they'd be like good enough to bite into or aged to an excellent vintage. And then the implication is all about consumption and all about sex all at once, which is the whole thing of the show. Is that it's like I say, it's about me dissecting vampires as a thing. A huge part of that is like, I think it's essential for a vampire to be those things, to be about consumption and devouring and desire.
To be sexy. If a vampire is unsexy, there better be a really good reason for
there better
it,
be a very
right?
good reason.
They should either be very sexy or like revolting, like disgusting. And if they're just boring,
with my science for vampires, I actually took it in two directions, and there's the one that I like, which is the one for the show, and there's the one that I can talk about at length, which but I won't subject you that. Where I'm talking about vampires as kind of being like, if they functioned as like a mammal that was an obligate blood drinker, like a vampire bat, and I have done the maths on how many people they'd have to eat. But,
beautiful. Yeah. See, I had to deal with like the social ramifications of a world where vampires were normal. So I'm like, well, NHS blood delivery, I guess, like taxpayers funding the blood banks that feed the obligate hematophages, I guess, like trying to work out what our world would look like if, you know,
if vampires were in the norm.
Yeah.
I just want to bring this up before it becomes irrelevant. Sexy fruit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I have to bring up the sexy fruit. It was like right there. But yeah, before it becomes irrelevant. We're on the tangent already, but I promise I'll give you time to talk, Ella. But like,
I'm having a great time.
My favorite version of like, there are many vampire versions, right? Like there are like, you know, and a lot of like typical ones. There are media that don't do anything crazy with the vampire lore, but do a really good story with existing vampire lore. My favorite one is Vassal Lord, and I don't know if you know what that is. It's so it's like really unknown, but it's basically like, if you know Hellsing the anime, it has sort of that vibe, but it is about queer vampires, and the Catholic Church and a cyborg priest. And my favorite aspect of the world building in that is because, you know, very typically like very Blade, very like Hellsing, it's like a sect of vampires want to take over the world. and it was supposed to happen a long time ago, and the reason it didn't happen is because they had this plan to populate the world with vampires, and they had a vampire Adam and a vampire Eve, but vampire Adam is gay and vampire Eve is a lesbian, so they ended up not taking over the world, and that's the reason the world was saved from like a vampire apocalypse.
And this is the gay agenda. I really like the idea of like the kind of comedy of errors of how many excuses they came up with before they came clean. It's like, okay, so like, is she pregnant yet? No, like we're working on it. It just, something just doesn't seem to be working. Like, I don't know if we maybe like test or something.
Putting it in the right place. Oh yeah.
Oh sure, yeah,
yeah, definitely, for sure. I also, you know, before the conversation moves on, have to point out that, like, we're a bunch of queers, so in many ways we could describe ourselves as a group of sexy fruits. And
yes, you went there, because I was sitting there and I was like, someone's got to make the sexy fruit joke.
Listen, Eira went so far past the line with the Not Quite Dead marketing campaign. Anything is fair game. Like, we can do whatever we want, and that's great.
I've sent some examples into our little Discord chat. But yeah,
I'll look later.
I really, really enjoyed like watching this campaign happen, because I do think if anyone's listened to that podcast, it's pretty explicitly sexual from pretty early on in the series. But like for people who haven't, I was just really hoping there were a few people who were like, "What is this?" Also, I love Monstrous Agonies. Hero, did you ever listen to Supernatural Sexualities with Dr. Seabrook?
I did not.
Oh my god! So I mostly it was amazing. It was from Passive Productions. They're the people who made Love and Luck. Leave It Davis Thalborn and Aaron Kyan. They're based in Australia. And Supernatural Sexualities with Dr. Seabrook was a late night call show for monsters. And it was hosted by this brilliant actress who is an Aboriginal woman who lives in Australia, and she had this like very sultry voice, and it was all like it's a little bit Bright Sessionsy, where like towards the end we were like, oh, maybe she's got something going on. But it was only one season. They never made more. And I was like, oh, there is a hole in my life for a late night call-in show for monsters. And then someone who'd submitted something to Monstrous Agonies was like, have you heard of Monstrous Agonies? And I was like, this is what I've been looking for all my life.
All my life since that one podcast ended.
All my life since, listen, what you have to understand, right, is that I am prone to hyperbole. But also, as someone with ADHD, everything feels like the biggest thing ever. But yeah, no, it's truly delightful. Although I do also, as Hero knows, and as anyone who follows my social media presence knows, really, really love Traveling Light as well. It's really good. I know we're here to talk about folklore, but it's a great show.
Speaking of folklore, Ella, what is your podcast about, and how does it relate to folklore?
Yes, sorry.
No,
my
fine.
podcast is called...
No, I'm happy. I'm very happy.
It's called Camlann, an audio drama, and people who know Arthuriana will already know that this is an Arthurian show, because the Battle of Camlann is where everyone dies in the Arthurian legends. It's post-apocalyptic audio drama.
Spoilers.
It's like an urban fantasy. I know, I'm so sorry. It's like, listen, 1,000 years is not long enough. It's still too soon. Arthur dies, guys. It's urban fantasy, post-apocalyptic, and the idea is that one day all mythology and folklore come to life at once. So the primary mythologies and folklore featured in Camlann are Arthurian mythology, medieval Welsh literature, a bit of like English folklore, and Scottish and then Greek mythology, which was for two reasons. So like it's implied and it is like explicit in the show that everywhere all around the world, all of the mythologies and folklore have come to life in different ways. But fundamentally, like I'm a white woman who grew up in the UK. I didn't want to kind of write on behalf of like cultures other than my own and how their mythologies would manifest, especially because like the way it works in Camlann is so tied to your community's relationship with that folklore. So, you know, one of my like pie in the sky daydreams is one day I invite a bunch of guest writers and go, this is how Camlann works. Write for it. Do a story that you think would be interesting with your culture. Yes, you are on my list, Watson. Actually, Hero is also because like one of the interesting things about the process of development for Camlann is very much about Britain, is very much about Scotland, England, and Wales. But like a quite important thing early on in the development process was that I vehemently believe and think that like Ireland just has such a distinctly different culture, and where like Scotland and England and Wales kind of feed into each other because like we are on the same landmass and peoples have moved between the three countries, and even though they are very distinctive cultures, they fundamentally influence each other much more directly. Ireland just did, before like there was any contact with England, have like a whole distinct culture, and even after there was contact with the other nations, like continued to have a much more distinctive culture, and so it doesn't quite work into the kind of fluidity of Camlann that we have. So like with so yeah, it's just something that comes up sometimes where it's like, yeah, of course I'm fascinated by Irish mythology and folklore, it's amazing. I would prefer an Irish writer to write that in kind of the same way. But yeah, so Camlann, it features mostly Welsh, English, Scottish, and Greek mythology and folklore. It implies featuring of other world mythologies and folklores to a greater or lesser degree.
That's awesome. Yeah, I've always been interested. Like, it's one of those problems where I cannot listen to all the audio drama I want to because I'm too busy making an audio drama. And also my other problem, which is more personal, which is that if I really think that I love something, it'll take me like 3 to 4 years, business years, to get there. I knew about Hades Town from the very beginning, and I listened to it in 2022. So yeah, that's like kind of eventually. But yeah, so I'll introduce mine. So Hainai is a podcast about a Filipino immigrant who moves to Toronto and seems to be dealing with supernatural issues very strangely easily, and that's because she grew up with a babaylan mother, or like a shaman mother. And what the mythology that goes into that is an interesting thing about Filipino mythology is that I say Philippine mythology, but there are so many parts of the Philippines, and so there are multiple mythologies. They're like a very, very prodigious bunch of different mythologies from different places, because the Philippines has 160 languages and dozens of mythologies. And a lot of them are similar to each other because they're so close together, and so you have similar names, similar characters, but then from different places in the Philippines, they have different roles. And in the case of Hainai, an interesting thing that happens with the protagonist is that she does pray to Tagalog gods. So Tagalog is the closest language to what the Filipino language is. It is basically the language that Filipino is based on. So Tagalog, and she comes from the Tagalog region, whereas her nanay or her mother comes from the Bisaya region. So even though her mother taught her everything she knows, she does not pray to the same gods, which is an interesting thing because her tatay or her dad comes from the Tagalog region and she grew up there. So what ends up happening is that she has all of the things her nanay taught her, but her nanay has different gods, whereas she has Tagalog gods. And that's what I'm going to talk about later. But basically, and this is because I don't know enough about Bisaya gods to talk about them at length. And these are all Filipino gods. But again, like Bisaya gods are totally different from Tagalog gods. They are different characters. I believe like their sky god is named Captan, whereas ours is Bathala. So like they're completely different people. And I have seen other people cover Bisaya gods while I'm covering Tagalog gods. It's been great because it's like you don't get to, like, you can learn a little bit about all Philippine mythologies, but when you really want to tell a story, you have to very specifically hone in on which region you're talking about, because I'm talking about Tagalog gods. All that being said, Mary, the main character, she wears like pendants that present like her connection to the Tagalog god. She talks about the Tagalog god, she prays to them, and they may have an even bigger connection to her than she realizes, which will be covered in the future. But it is very exciting and it is my favorite thing to do. But it's not the only mythology or folklore we cover in Hainai. Another thing is we cover like Philippine monsters in Hainai, and largely in Mary talking about her childhood and encountering these monsters kind of very casually, like, oh, this baby tried to kill me once, because it's a Philippine monster.
I just listened to the episode where she mentions that and they were like, hello.
Yeah, this baby tried to kill me once. And then there's like another one about a creature that when it's close by it's quieter, and when it's like far away it's louder. So if it's quiet, then that means it's like right there. So like things like that.
That's
So like
so
Philippine, yeah, it's wonderful horror. I love writing about it. It doesn't like play in. It plays in more to Mary's character, but not necessarily the main story. So I kind of put it as bonus episodes or like kind of break episodes. But and we have another character who has a little bit of Indian mythology, but because again I know a basic amount, but because I don't go fully into it because I don't have the amount of knowledge that that would be required to like do it with more nuance. But we do have a character whose guardian is Hanuman, and so, which was very fun when Monkey Man came out, because I was like, they're the same guy, because like it's basically about, you know, if you know what Monkey Man is, it's like, oh, his parents were killed by fascists, by by Hindu nationalists, it yeah, and they worship Hanuman. That is a character in Hainai, actually. I was not expecting that. I don't think that character exists. I didn't think.
So Dev Patel's going to be on High Night, right? Like,
he would have to.
Dev going to star in the film.
Yeah, exactly. He's going to be the film character. No, it's going to be great. But yeah, so that's like, mythology does play a lot into Hainai, but it's specific, the Philippine mythology that I love to kind of talk about, in Tagalog mythology in general. But yeah, so that was the first question. Let me read some comments from people as we have been chatting. Jarathax on YouTube says, working my way through Remnants now, love it. So big fan of Remnants for Jarathax. And on Twitch, people have been saying, woo, Camlann, woo, not quite dead. And woo, Monstrous Agonies. Woo, sexy fruit.
Gotta whoop the sexy fruit.
Woo, sexy fruit. I may have embellished the sexy fruit, but that was my feelings about the sexy fruit. Okay, let me. I swear I had questions, and I'm like, I'm thinking. No.
One thing that yes. struck me while we were talking, I was thinking about, like, I was when you first invited us to do this call, I was like, okay, folklore and mythology, and I was like, what's the difference? And I was thinking about, like, when we talk about, like, dabbling in stories from, you know, talking about stories from your own culture, you're like, I feel confident in this. This is fine. I know what's allowed. I know what's appropriate. I know what's respectable. But then, like, the idea, I think one of the things that came up sometimes in Monstrous Agonies was, like, occasionally you'd get stories that were about gods. Mm-hmm. And you're like, okay, so is this cool? So, like, we had some ancient Greek gods, and I was like, that's fine. I think anyone who's still worshipping ancient Greek gods, they'll be fine with this. This feels okay. And if they're talking about, you know, like a bit of English folklore about a, you know, god king thing, and you're like, that's fine, whatever. But yeah, like, running into these things where you're like, oh, can I? Where's the line between, like, taking something that is a fun folklore story that I can play with and I can do whatever I want, and also probably has a religious dimension, because so many things do, like, you know, if you talk about religion or spirituality, then it's going to be there. And when does that become, like, you're being a dick? Like,
I have so many thoughts and feelings about this, and I'm also really excited to hear, like, Motzi and Eira's thoughts, but I almost like more kind of Motzi's on this specific subject, because I just, like, I'm really interested about your perspective from a completely different continent. You know, that it's a fascinating thing that came up a lot in Rising Camlann, because, like, a rule that I kind of, like, out of character kind of made clear to people from the start is, like, we're not going to be talking about gods, because I don't feel comfortable doing what I like to think of as the supernatural effect of canonizing that one god and one religion is real and everyone else's religions are stupid. And this often happens, especially with, like, white Western Christian media, where, like, Christianity is real and then everything else was just really Christianity all along, which is just colonialism. So, like, it's bullshit and I hate it. And so it was, like, very, very explicit from the start with Camlann that, like, we're not going to touch on gods, we're not going to touch on, so it's a big thing that, like, and it's been fascinating, because the UK and Ireland were converted to Christianity very, very early on in the history of these islands, and so we basically don't have folklore and mythology that isn't influenced by Christianity, and anyone who tells you otherwise is lying and making things up. And you know, we have traces, and we try to restore traces, and this is especially important, obviously, two nations that were like occupied, and then it had their culture like variously destroyed by the English, right? So especially to the Celtic nations. But fundamentally, the reality is, especially like, and I mean the areas that I know most about are Wales, Scotland, and England, we just don't have documentary cohesive evidence of like any pre-Christian religion, because they were converted to Christianity really early on and everything was destroyed. So if you're going to talk about medieval British folklore in Scotland, Wales, and England, you have to incorporate Christianity. People were writing spells that, you know, you bury a frog for the length of the time it takes you to say a Christian psalm, and then you take the frog back to curse your neighbor, you know, because that was just what was happening. The folk culture, the culture of the folk, was influenced by the religion of the folk, and the religion of the folk was a version of Christianity. So it's really interesting how you see that handled in podcasts like Desperado with like Mexican Christianity, and the way that like Mexican Christianity over time has evolved to like really kind of become in many ways its own folk religion in different places, but it is irrevocably and irretrievably linked to Christianity. And artificially trying to separate them, I think, is as disrespectful as anything else. So this was always a really interesting problem. Arthuriana, the whole King Arthur cycle, massively influenced by Christianity. You cannot talk about King Arthur without talking about Christianity. So that was kind of a really interesting challenge. And so one of the big things was that early on, like, people kept being like, well, why can't people with saints' names, like Christian saints' names, have like magical powers? And it was like, because we're not doing religion, because we're not doing gods. And so like that's just not going to kick in. And that's especially relevant actually to the main character of our show. And it was a way of kind of simply demonstrating that with his name, where his name is David, which is David in Welsh. And David is the patron saint of Wales. He's a very important saint. But David, our protagonist, doesn't have any like saint appropriate powers. And then that's kind of how the gang know that it like religion isn't kicking in. Because if it was, Dai should have powers and he doesn't. But yeah, so like first of all, that was really interesting. But then second, in terms of like the difference between mythology and folklore, because I got a bit off track because I have ADHD. I think like I think at least in my own studies and research, which again like is very Europe centric, is very British Isles centric. My understanding of it, and the way that I personally would distinguish it, is mythology is much more about like pantheons, creation, the world, the end of the world. It's big. There's a sense of scale, and often that has religious elements. Not always, because you know sometimes you have places where there is a mythology and there is a religion, and the religion that is practiced is different to the mythology, but we still have the mythology as well. You know, like, but like I certainly would strive to treat mythology with more care, whereas folklore is the lore of the folk, which means that it could be what your gran told you about the well down the road that her gran told her, and no one outside of your village has ever heard it, but like that is folklore. And it could be something you read in a book about like fairies, and it could be whatever. And so but then to come back to kind of, for me personally, I have like a decent academic understanding of these subjects, and if I really was motivated, I guess I could sit down and write an essay about it, as friends of mine occasionally do on subjects they feel strongly about. But for me, it's almost like, you know, like the grammar of the language that you speak, or languages, if you speak plural languages. For me, understanding the difference of like what is folklore, it feels like that instinctive understanding of grammar where you write a sentence, you're like, that's just a wrong sentence. And you're not really sure why it's a wrong sentence, but it's wrong. And I find that for folklore, like there is like, if you grow up in a community, in a culture, you're surrounded by people in your culture and in your community constantly reinforcing or repeating different ideas and pieces of information, so that without you being able to coherently say, oh, when I was 6 years old, my primary school teacher said this thing about that, you're not going to remember that detail, but you do know, oh, but like that would never happen because that's not how, you know, great shucky dogs work. Like,
yeah. Work.
Yeah, right. Like, and so there's that beautiful like sense of instinct. But then in the same way, like with that beautiful sense of instinct, again, to kind of come back to what we were brushing on before, like it's just, I don't have that instinct for example, like any Indian folklore. I just don't have it, and so it's like, I could attempt to do it, and like Motsi, you said, like I also like I have a decent understanding of like world mythologies, various, but like I don't have that emotional connection. And I think as a storyteller, it's like I just can't tell an interesting story about it. Like what I can tell you is the story that anyone who arrives in this country for a week would tell you, which is just kind of like a shallow, like, and that's fine. But like it's more interesting to have a story from someone who actually has an emotional connection to it. Because when I think about folklore from the British Isles and telling stories about that, it's like I have feelings about it. I have ways that I want to subvert it and engage with it. I have things that like are the reason that it calls to me and the reason I find it compelling. I have like things that are like why I feel it's meaningful in different contexts, why I want to tell kids that story. And I don't have that same like draw. No matter how fascinating I find out, because I didn't grow up with them, and my grandma didn't tell me them when I was falling asleep, and so I just don't have that like chemistry almost with the story. And I think you do need that if you want to tell a really powerful story. These stories have been told so many times that like just repeating the facts of it is not necessarily enough to make a compelling story.
Exactly. And I think like when you ask like the difference between mythology and folklore, it is that scale and that relationship. Like folklore is something where you have a connection to it, or like the scale is smaller, but also just like the way you relate to it is a different way. Like it's more personal and it's more like contextual. Whereas like urban legends can be folklore, but mythology is more like it's kind of a grander scale. It's more like often about gods or heroes. It is like there is a certain level where while they can overlap, you can kind of tell that mythology is about like grander, more like somewhat more distant, but also like more fixed figures. With a level of history to them, whereas folklore has a much more personal level of like history of just where you're from, your area, what you grew up with, and everyone kind of sharing each other's version of that is folklore in my thought. But again, like those two are kind of very fluid and feed into each other.
I'm really sorry. I'm aware that I talked for like a million years, but I did just remember I had one other thought that I wanted to share, but I can pause. I don't want to mess with your stream.
No worries. Like, what was everyone else's thoughts? Does everyone want to like say something before Ella goes back into it?
Before more monologue.
Before more Ella. We love it. We love the Ella monologue, but we just want to make sure, like, how is everyone feeling?
I mean, I'm pro monologue.
There you go. Go on, Ella.
Much easier to be on a stream when somebody's monologuing and you just go, am I smiling nicely enough?
Yeah. We're all looking at our little thumbnails. Go on.
It is also interesting. It's a subject that I've definitely spoken to Eira about, but I think there's another aspect which was just kind of as an aside. I can't remember if it was you, Malty, or Hero that said it, but something about like Greek mythology, where it's like everyone knows about Greek mythology. But I think like actually that's a really good point. Because it's something that I want to bring up, which is, so when we did Camlann, I wanted to do a Greek mythology episode because I was very much along the lines of most European countries have appropriated classical Greek and Roman mythology as their own mythology in an effort to empire build as an echo of the empires that existed before. And so we were all raised like in Europe with like Greco-Roman mythologies. Like that's a big part of our education. It's a big part of our culture. However, the more I thought about it and the more I kind of looked into it, I felt very strongly that I wanted the voice actors in that episode to be actually Greek and to have Greek accents, because you almost never see depictions of Greek mythology where there are Greek actors. You almost never see depictions of Greek mythology with Greek accents or the words being said in a Greek way. Greece has had a really rough couple of decades. It is a country that has been struggling a lot socially, politically, and economically. And the fact that also the world has just kind of robbed their mythology kind of sucks. And it's like, it's true that like 2,000 years ago, Greece had an empire. That was 2,000 years ago. It's a pretty long time. It doesn't anymore. It hasn't for a long time. And every country in the world has a complicated political history. But I do think something that I find quite interesting, that I think about a lot and interrogate a lot, certainly in my own work, is there's an aphorism in Europe that is that the Nazis invaded Germany first. That like the first place to fall to Nazism was Germany. And the people who most often tried to assassinate Hitler were German. Germany really suffered under the Nazis because the Nazis didn't care about Germany, they cared about Nazism, right? And I promise I've brought up the Nazis for a reason.
Yes, go on.
But like in the context of colonialism and whiteness and imperialism and how those things do very directly intersect with mythology and folklore, especially in Europe. Like, I'm a person who loves medieval history and medieval folklore. I have to confront the fact that the reality is that whether we're talking about Viking Age Scandinavia or Celtic folklore or English folklore, those things are often used as symbols of white nationalism, and they're often used as like kind of totems of white nationalist movements. And so if I'm going to be engaging with these themes responsibly, like as an artist, I kind of have to ask myself some really serious questions about like, what is important about this as folklore? Am I giving more ammunition to a bunch of fascist nationalists? Like, what am I doing here? And I personally fall down on the side of, I feel very strongly that in order to make England into the imperial machine that it was, first the Normans, then Elizabeth in the 1600s, then Victoria in the 1800s had to destroy English culture. They had to replace English culture with empire. And empire isn't a real culture. Empire is an artificial culture. It's a myth. It's a story that we make up where we say that, you know, this is the most perfect whatever, whatever, whatever. And so you have these moments throughout English history where England as an identity and as a culture is reinvented very deliberately by our monarchies. And our history is replaced. So we in the 1800s, we get told that no, England was actually founded by a Roman hero who escaped from the siege of Troy, and really we can trace our lineage back all the way to Greco-Roman empires. And this leads to like a common misconception among English people that English is a Latinate language that is predominantly informed by Latin, which is not true. And it's not grammatically true, which means that people can't conjugate our words. They literally don't. So when we, for example, we've got the word octopus, people try to say octopi because they are trying to conjugate it in a Latinate way, but we're not a Latinate language, we're a Germanic language. And the word octopus is a word that we borrowed from Greek, which is from a completely different language family. And really the correct conjugation here would be octopuses. Now I understand that might seem irrelevant, but this
just enjoying is like, the Nazis, octopuses, keep off. You're like, okay, where next? I'm fascinated.
Hail Hydra, go on.
This obsession with Rome and Greece is just a pantomime of empire, right? And that pantomime of empire is detached from reality. And the reality is that English is a Germanic language, and that under the terms of England's own empire, Germany and Germanic languages are more barbaric than Latin languages. And so we cannot admit that the language is what it is, which means that people who speak English literally can't speak their own language because they have been lied to about what their language is. And this can expand out to us talking about the mythology and folklore. We have been told a version of our mythology and folklore. King Arthur is English. King Arthur was never English. He's pretty provably Welsh. There isn't an academic debate about this. It irritates me when people say there is. Like, it's the academic debate is there's a bunch of crusty old English scholars who don't want to admit that King Arthur is Welsh, and everyone else has just moved on with their lives. And you know, so like King Arthur is a Welsh story about resistance, about living in a nation under occupation, and one day having independence again. That's what the story is. That's why one day King Arthur will be king of all Britain again. It's about Wales being free. It's about the Welsh people understanding that they were an independent nation, they got occupied, they want to be free again. The English kind of appropriate Arthur, and it's like, nah, it's a blonde guy with a sword. And then they just don't know why it's not emotionally impactful anymore. It's like, it's a blonde guy with a sword, and we're in charge, and then we'll always be in charge. And it's like, that's nothing. That's really nothing. That's not interesting. It doesn't resonate with anyone. It doesn't even really resonate with English people because they know it's not their culture.
Yeah.
And so something that I feel really strongly to kind of finally take us back around to Greece is when you remove a culture from itself, when you lobotomize a culture in this way, I think the vacuum, that wound, just invites hatred and it invites violence. Something that on the production of Camlann we noticed, because we had an English, Scottish and Welsh team, and it was interesting because a lot of Scottish and Welsh people had never really had a chance to talk to each other about this shit because they just, Scotland and Wales are kind of far apart. There's not much reason to kind of go to each unless you've got like strong family or whatever. And so they just had never, like some of our Scottish people had never spoken to a Welsh person and vice versa. And they were suddenly being like, wow, we've got like a lot in common, turns out. But one thing that we talked about was that English people often react incredibly defensively and aggressively when talking to Welsh, Scottish or Irish people about Welsh, Scottish or Irish people's culture. And my personal theory is that one reason for that is English people are defensive because they don't have a fucking culture. They reach for a culture and there's nothing there. They can't reach for anything other than the empire, and the empire died. It's been dead for 150 years. It doesn't exist anymore.
I want to say,
and so they've got nothing.
Yeah, and I want to say like that's similar to white culture in the US. Like that's a thing that a lot of like they're trying to reach for certain things because whiteness kind of eradicated a lot of like what culture each of them would have been if they weren't just white. And it's like, people who have like when they think like Irish Americans who are insisting upon their own Irishness, even if, you know, like Irish people in Ireland are like, but it's kind of because
It's
adapting,
just simply mortifying.
yeah, it's like adapting whiteness has kind of like eradicated a part of them that they now they really want, and like every person like needs. And I think that, like, you know, I think, like as you said, empire made is a non, it's like a kind of like a vacuum of culture. In a similar way, like whiteness is a vacuum of culture, where it's like being white is not a culture. It is a nexus of influence and power, but it is not a culture. And so people who are actually like want to reach past being white and like actually being like what their culture is, there is like, yeah, there some people are able to do it and it's wonderful, but some people can't because they don't know like what it is anymore. And I just want to
I
say,
think also what I
oh, yes.
see from, sorry, like when I see like say like white Americans, occasionally I see white Americans saying like, oh well, I'm white, I don't have a culture. And as a white non-American, you're going, are you kidding me?
You do.
You're telling me that Minnesota isn't outrageously cultured,
Yeah, exactly.
like so deeply,
Like-
profoundly Minnesotan,
like city
you know,
cultures,
in a way
like
that
that.
no
That's
one else in the world.
and I think that's wonderful. I think it's like people are starting to figure that out. Like you do have a culture. It's like your city, your upbringing, like maybe your family tree, like those are cultures. It's like, you know, like there are
Yeah.
certain things you thought were cultures but aren't, but there are things that are our cultures. Like
Yeah. And,
even
like,
if it's just
culture
like a city or a
isn't a
town.
word for like foreign. Like it's not, culture isn't something that other people do. We're all immersed in it all the time, constantly. We are like, I am English, but I live in Northern Ireland. Northern Irish culture is different than Irish culture in the South. It's different than British culture. It's my experience of that as an English person who's lived here my whole adult life is profoundly different than other people's, and you're like, yeah, this counts. And but I, in my experience, I think you get like that violence and that defensiveness comes from a feeling of something being attacked, you know. So if you don't have a feeling of like security in what you're actually rooted in, and you don't have an ability to value it as it is, and you feel it's being attacked and it's being taken away, then you start sort of going aggressively. Whereas if somebody tells me like, oh well, you're just English, and I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
that's okay.
Yeah.
It's allowed.
Ooh. Just a quick break. I want to say one, cat, Eira, adorable cat. I've been looking
Yeah,
at
I'm
this whole
sorry.
time.
She was asleep so quietly,
She's so
and
sweet.
now she's
And
having a very dramatic washback. There.
yes, exactly. And second one is earlier on we were talking about folklore, and Flame Fire Nut said, I remember watching a YouTube video arguing that creepypasta is a form of folklore. Correct. It is a form of folklore, and like same urban legends, like they are a folklore that have grown on the internet, which is in itself a wonderful thing. Everyone says cute cat, hi, hello, cute cat, yes. Everyone's saying hello to your kitty, Eira. And yeah, I'm just making sure we get all our comments in. And yeah, we can like if you have any more thoughts on this topic, but we can like kind of roll into the next one if thoughts.
I mean, we just as a footnote, we had a whole thing on our casting call for Camlann where we were like, two of the main speaking roles are going to have to speak Welsh. Welsh is not an easy language to learn, and so we were like, we prefer someone who is fluent in Welsh, and also like ideally what we said was we want people with meaningful lived experience of being in Wales who consider themselves to be Welsh. We didn't want to exclude people who like immigrated to Wales and might be like, oh well, I only immigrated when I was 3, so I'm not really Welsh. Like we wanted to be like, you are Welsh, but we wanted to make sure that someone had like meaningful connection to it.
Yeah.
I had so many Americans applying for that fucking role, and like my favorite one, which I honestly just want to share with Hero and Eira, was someone who said that they were American / English / Irish / Welsh / Scottish, and I was like, are you? They were like, no, I definitely qualify.
Yeah, and oh, I'm sorry. I just want to bring up, like, when you're talking about Welsh speakers, what's really cool is I think one of the most famous Welsh people in the world, I will say this, he is an internet celebrity, but he is so proudly Welsh. It is kind of wonderful. Like every now and then, because he speaks in a very like very very like posh English way. He is a micro celebrity, or I don't know, a macro. He is an internet celebrity who is part of like this fame. Like he lives in Japan now. His name is Connor. And what I like about it is that every now and then when he's asked to talk about being Welsh, he is so deeply like nationalistic in a wonderful way, in like a England, like he very, very unprompted talks about how England like flooded a Welsh town because like he's just like goes immediately like flooded a Welsh town for like with while the people were still living there, and like he keeps talking about like how he still speaks Welsh and how he misses, like he constantly talks about his upbringing, his culture, and he's very proud of like being Welsh. And I think about that because it's like, you know, in general he's not asked about it very often, but he loves bringing it up. He loves talking about it. He's so proud of his own culture, and it's always great to see people who just like naturally in their own time. Like this guy got famous because of anime, living in Japan, being on a famous podcast, being a gamer, and whenever he's asked to talk about being Welsh, he's like, "Let me tell you about being Welsh," and but in like a lovely sort of like, I'm so proud of like my heritage kind of thing. And like he was talking about how he once did the Mari, I don't know how to say it, Marilud, and he got beat up. He got beat up while in the horse skull, and he's like, "I'm never doing this again." It's like because he got hit with sticks and things like that, and you know, it's great.
I think the thing that people, the mistake that people make when they think about Wales is they think of Wales as a place that's been like historically squashed by England, where it's like an active thing that is currently happening now. And like certainly, so the area I grew up in is one of the most underserved areas in the UK. And it was, you know, we just had no resources anywhere. There's nothing to do. And that's as a result of colonization by England. And so that sort of idea of like, you understand this has happened, like this is a thing that has happened to Wales. I remember I went on a school trip when I was about 9, and I went to school in a village called Dyzeth, which is near to another village called Rhuddlan, which is where I lived. And Rhuddlan is significant for 2 reasons. The first is that it's where the parliamentary decree was signed that made Wales a principality. It's like the town where it happened, and now it's just nothing. It's just like mostly council estate and a massive medieval castle with a really complicated moat system. And we went on this school trip to Rhuddlan Castle, but we didn't go to the castle. We went to a mound next to it, which is called Tut Hill, and that was a Celtic fortress. And it's the reason why Rhuddlan Castle was built. And we climbed the hill and we stood on the hill, and our teacher went, like, that castle was built to destroy the culture that lived here. This is all that remains of them, and that's the castle. And we all stood like in silence, age 9, looking at this castle like, oh my god. And then hilariously the teacher was like, yeah, and the reason why the rocks at Rhuddlan Castle, you see the shape of it's really odd. It's really well preserved from about 7 foot up, but from 7 foot down there's the walls go in like this, and it's because the people, as soon as the fortress was no longer being supported by England, they went in and they stole all the rocks, and almost all of the cottages around Rhuddlan, the old cottages, are built out of castle, which is really cool.
Excellent. I was thinking, you reminded me there of I quite like just sticking on some crappy BBC documentaries on in the background while I'm doing things. And there was one that was about castles, British castles, and by British they meant English, Scottish, and Welsh, because that's all the same thing, sure. And the first episode, like 5 minutes in, he was like, so this castle was built to hold back the savage Welsh. And I was like, is that how the people who live there talk about that castle? And this was a fairly new documentary, like this one, when you were saying like this is a thing that is still happening. This is still the way that English people talk about, let alone foreign countries that were colonized, but literally the ones they're attached to.
But I think there is like something like here which is important to recognize, which is like there is a significant reason why like my show has Welsh protagonists in the Welsh language and uses Welsh literature and stuff. It's because this is an issue that I care really strongly about. my nan lives in Wales, but like I went to Wales a lot growing up, but I also studied the history of Wales at university and stuff. And yeah, like there are a few things at play here. One is often when I talk to people from North America and Canada, I kind of explain that like it's not that the UK is less racist than America, it's that we have new, exciting flavors of racism that are not just connected to color. So like in England, you can be white and also a person of color in the way that Americans understand a person of color, which is someone who's treated with prejudice, ignorance, who's treated as if you're stupid, less likely to get work, etc. It doesn't matter if you're white. What does matter is what your accent is, where you're from, that kind of thing. So some of the most viciously attacked by the police, by our government, by our laws, a group of people in the UK are Romany travellers. Pretty much all Romany travellers are white passing. In America, they would be considered to be white. In Europe, they are very much not. They are violently attacked consistently. Their communities, children are taken away from families. It's very bad. In a similar way, as Eira was explaining, Wales currently suffers under the British government. A big thing that has been happening, especially for the last 200 years, is that England basically drains money out of Wales and pours it into English projects, but that includes like our healthcare, our travel, which means that Wales doesn't get that money, which means that despite the fact that the UK is a pretty wealthy country in Europe, Wales has one of the poorest towns in this continent. Like poverty levels in Wales are very extreme, and it's not because Wales can't sustain itself, it's because England vampirically leeches off it. There is also the fact that, as you alluded to, Motzi, this influencer you mentioned, there's this town that was drowned. That was specifically because there was a drought in England. And instead of doing any fixes in England, what the English government came up with was that they would flood this historic town. And everyone got removed. But that's not the only situation. There are several other very distressing disasters that I don't know the stream has necessarily been like appropriately awarded for, and I don't want to traumatize people, but there have been like coal mining accidents and stuff that happened as a direct result of English negligence. There was a big disaster that killed several families, and particularly children, that like Welsh families still didn't get compensation for, and that's because they were told by the English that they weren't clever enough to know what to do with the money that they were being given for the death of their 6-year-old children. So like Welsh people would be beaten for speaking Welsh up until like the 1960s by the police and by teachers. So like the Welsh language is like often when I talk to my like Welsh friends and colleagues, their parents and grandparents refuse to speak Welsh because even though they grew up with that as their first language, they won't speak it because they've been told that they're not allowed to. And there's been a lot of effort to like restore the Welsh language, but it is really important to understand that like Wales is not. Well, not even just the reason, the fact that this is happening, like Eira said, the fact that this is not in the past. And to be honest, actually, I think a lot of both English and American people don't even understand this happened in the past. They don't have a really good understanding of what England did to Wales or does to Wales. But also the fact that like Wales is an independent culture, that when the last Prince of Wales, Clonard Griffith, was killed in 1282, he, like Wales as a self-recognizing cultural identity, like Cymru, people describing themselves as Welsh, that had existed longer than England has existed now. So like Wales is a very, very old culture that knows itself and knows what it is and knows what its identity is. It's not a principality, this isn't a debate. Like and yeah, like it's just one of those things that I think can be a little bit hard sometimes for people outside of Europe to understand. But like within Europe, it's why I said that thing about the person who applied for the casting call. It's really rude and offensive to describe yourself as Welsh, Irish, Scottish, American, English, because you are not all of those things, because there are massive power dynamics between those nations. And even if you are a person who comes from a family that is both of those things, if you've been raised as American, you are often going to be recognized as American. If you're being raised as English, you are often going to be recognized as English. Most English people have like Welsh, Scottish, Irish in their family. That doesn't mean that they can describe themselves as Welsh, Scottish, or Irish. Here ends the lecture. It's just
that's great. And it's like it's very similar to how it's a big thing between Filipino communities and like Filipino Americans. It's just like they're on a personal level, I understand Filipino Americans feeling like kind of isolated from Filipinos who kind of like deny their Filipino-ness. And on some level, that's wrong. But also on some level, it is correct that they don't have the context of what is happening in the Philippines, what has been happening in the Philippines, just constantly. There is like a totally different, like, life is different. And it's like, I don't know, like when people are like, I tell people like, we are very protective of that identity. because it comes with hardship. Like just existing as it's a joke. It's a fun little meme where it's like, I'm in hell. I mean, the Philippines. But that's also like kind of the general vibe of people living in the Philippines. And it's a similar way where it's like, when you're Filipino American, yes, you're Filipino, but when we talk about Filipino in a certain way, talking about like what that life is like, you are not. And so it's like it depends on like what the context is. I will just mention very quickly some chats. One, Flamefire Nut says, my cat is also having a nice nap on my lap. Yay. Cherry Mecha identified the person I was talking about, Sea Dog VA. Yeah, he was a voice actor for a little bit, but generally he's just known as that guy, that famous guy who lives in Japan. And he knows Welsh, he knows English, and he knows Japanese as well. So he like loves learning about cultures. Cherry Mecha Flamefire Nut says, England, the unsexy vampire. Bring it back.
Right.
We got there. And I think another one was, let me see the last chat there. It was that's insanely fucked up, says Cherry Mecha. Yes, correct. It's insanely fucked up. But yeah, it's great. It's great to know about, well, it's not, the history's not great, but it's great to know about these things. Yeah, we love it. It's awesome. But it's always important to like think about dynamics and like context and culture. I feel like, and we come back to folklore and mythology about this. Context, culture, and dynamics are so important because I think, like from my perspective, for example, I'm proud to be Filipino. I wouldn't say that Filipino is like Filipino, and but the Philippines has 160 languages, that, and like just about as many like tribes and just, you know, like identities that are detached, that are not just Filipino. And when it is convenient and or like important for us to come together as a Filipino identity, we do. We're like proud to be Filipino. But then once that is not necessary, we're fighting each other all the time because like being Tagalog is different from being Bisaya, is different from being like Ilocano, and it's like that's a similar thing where it's like, sure, like if need be, British, but like on like if need be, but at the same time it's like, no, we are different people. Just, and that applies like on a national level, on a cultural level, on a city level, on a town level. It becomes like, I mean, such an interesting context.
I'm so sorry, I did not mean to interrupt. I think this is a little bit of a, but I mean, Eira can tell me, can verify this, but as I understand it, there's like, you get this a lot in Wales. So one of the things that, so there's a big difference between North Welsh and Southern Welsh in terms of like dialect and the language. And there's a lot of like rivalry and stuff between the cultures there because of like big historic, like a lot of history. And when we were making Camlann, one of the problems that I had was like, I knew that I needed Welsh language speaking voice actors who were willing to come to Glasgow to record for a week. And there's just not that many people in the world who fit that description. And so I was like, I don't want to specify Northern Welsh or Southern Welsh. And I also don't want to make a political thing in Camlann of being like, we are specifically like only using Northern Welsh or only using Southern Welsh. And so like what we ended up doing was saying that the main characters were from Aberystwyth, which is exactly in the middle of Wales, and therefore can realistically and justifiably have someone who has a Northern Welsh accent and someone who has a Southern Welsh accent, which is what we ended up casting, so that we could just be like, no, we're not engaging with that because the writer is English and she is not going to do this. But then we actually had that problem in recording where like Angharad is from the north and Tobias is from the south, and occasionally they would disagree on like how a Welsh word was pronounced or like how something should be said. And I'd be like, well, I can't be that. I'm English. I can't make the decision here. And so it would just be like a thing of like, you know, we'd
talk about it.
Angharad's dad, and we'd be like, okay, what do you think?
You get that then. I'm not getting in the way. Like you decide. Though it's great. It's like, and it applies a really dumb. So a thing I do in Hainai, it's something I was very worried about personally, but nobody cares about. I mean, nobody except for maybe certain Filipinos. So what happened was, I was like, okay, so Mary's nanay is Bisaya and Mary's tatay is Tagalog, and she worships Tagalog God, she speaks Tagalog, etc., etc. And then I realized, like, so Mary's maternal grandmother, I made a very early story early on that she was living in Batangas, which is in the Tagalog region. But then I realized, wait, her nanay is Bisaya. Why is she living at why is her grandmother living at the Tagalog region? So I was like, I had to make a whole random backstory where her nanay had to run away from her original town and and her tatay helped her settle in the Tagalog region, just so I could justify that. Nobody would have cared, but I was like, it's not accurate. She's not in that region. She's not supposed to be in that region. And I made a problem for myself that I had to like immediately like fix later. So it's like, she's not originally from that place, but she lives there now, so that we can retcon that first episode where I said she was in Batangas, and I was like, but no, like nobody would care until somebody does, because like we do have Filipinos who live there, and they're like, hey.
I think that was something I was thinking about a while ago on the stream, but several points ago. Was I was thinking about like, I think Ali, you mentioned like, you know, the idea of like, you know, British kids know Greek myths. I taught them in primary school, right? And it made me think about like, who are you assuming your audience is based on like, and how does that come across on what you're assuming they know about? So one of the things, I read a book last year. It was one of the best books I have ever read. It was when the angels left the old country. And I've forgotten the name of the author, but it's amazing. I think it's set in 1911, 1912, I think. And it's an angel and a demon from a shtetl in the Pale settlement that is so small it's just called shtetl. It doesn't have a name. And they leave and they go to America, and it's just uh, Jewish folklore just saturates this story. And one of the things that I loved about it was that at no point did the author go, by the way, that's a word for such and such, or like, oh, in that's Yiddish for thing, and like, oh, this is a Jewish tradition or whatever. It was just like, no, I'm writing a Jewish story as a Jewish audience author for a Jewish audience, and you may Google it. Like,
Yes.
I'm not explaining this. And I really love that, and I think that that's something that you know, when you write, you naturally you, you have to make a decision about who you think your audience is. And if you think that like this is jumping, I have this sort of dolphin brain ADHD where I'm just like, I'm not necessarily like a wall of connected thoughts. I'm just like, here are some random thoughts that you may pick up later. But it made me think about the Doctor Who episode with in the most recent season, where it was like revealed that this society was completely white, and they were you know, that they just sort of assumed that the audience wasn't going to pick up on that, because they assumed that the audience was all white people. You wouldn't immediately notice
Could
that this
potentially be the perils of letting a white man write an episode about anti-black racism.
Yeah.
Just gonna put it out there.
It was really something. It was just like, wow, this is so illustrative of who you think your audience is. And I also, final dolphin brain moment. I've been watching a lot of Midsummer Murders lately, like a lot of Midsummer Murders. And I tell you what, like these towns in this fake Somerset, right? And they're these little rural villages that are supposed to be profoundly English. And the more you watch them, the more dystopian they get. Because I'm on like season 9 or 10, like it's been running for forever. There has been one person of color with any lines in that many seasons, and it's this like presentation of Englishness that is really dark, actually, whereas these towns are completely isolated from any of the actual like social realities of England. They're completely like culturally homogenous. Like there's no poor people. There's no people of color. There's maybe one or two gay people, but it's weird that they're gay, you know, and it's this, yeah, like who is this for? I mean, me, because I'm watching it on MTVX, like,
Yeah.
while I'm doing my knitting, and I'm like, this is a terrible show. But, like,
Two things. First of all, it's the Downton Abbey effect, right? Like, it's the imagined version of England that exists rather than the actual England that exists.
yeah.
Three things. Second thing, one of the things that I feel really strongly about, the reason that I like making stories about folklore and history is like the reality is so different. Like, so a thing that often surprises Americans is that like England has had wealthy, landowning, politically influential, free black people from like the year 410 AD, like way before the transatlantic slave trade. I mentioned that we got converted to Christianity really early. The person who oversaw the establishment of the church in England was a man called Saint Hadrian, who was a black man from North Africa. He was like, he's the reason that we have the Christian church. The reason that America has a Christian church, the reason that England has a Christian church is because they have a black man from North Africa who was so powerful and so educated and so wealthy and respected that he was given the task by the Pope. And so when people imagine this version of England, it's just like, that's not a version of England that has ever existed, not even thousands of years ago. But also, my third thing is, Eira hasn't said anything for like 40 minutes, and I want to know what he has to say.
Well, I have thoughts. I've been having thoughts. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. There are some things I wanted to mention about a connection between language and mythology that's really connected with place that I thought really stood out to me when you were doing your introduction, Lotsie, which I think has come up and we've revisited it on several occasions because I think it's really important and it's something that really resonates with me as somebody who grew up in Wales and learned how to speak Welsh, and also as somebody who has like Jewish heritage, which mostly shows up in linguistic ways and cultural ways. Like I just thought old people said "oi," they don't. That's a Jewish thing.
Yeah.
I didn't know that, and I think that's really interesting how that connects with mythology and folklore and how we understand who we are. And I thought that was really interesting how the lengths you were going to try and connect that just for yourself to rationalize why she would be here if you'd said that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that was really fascinating.
Yeah, no, it's really fun, and it matters to me because I never learned how to speak Bisaya, but I also know a lot of Bisaya just by osmosis. And it's same thing, like as you mentioned, like you thought that all old people said "oi," but it's just like a Jewish thing. I had like moments where I was like, I thought it was all Tagalog, but because my nanay would say it and she spoke Tagalog to me and English to me, but it was all Bisaya stuff that she just carried over. And because the two languages sound so similar and are so like close together, that I just never knew. And when I mentioned them, some people are like, "That's not Tagalog." I'm like, "Oh, it's not Tagalog. Oh, I didn't know that." So it was just one of those things. I'll quickly just read some comments. The book that you mentioned, Hero, Halo Cat says it's by Sasha Lamb. So that was cool. And then Shy Magpie said, I've read some great opinion pieces on, oh no, I'm not putting half the dialogue in italics. I said which cultures the characters come from. And they don't use these words any different than the rest of the sentence. That's true. Like that's a thing where you don't put something in italics anymore if it's another language, just to kind of show that this is like normal, like this is not like unusual. And I do find that. I think on a written page, and especially like as far as like using it often goes, I think you can go without like translating a word necessarily. I try to do it in my introductions of Hainai, just because like I don't know if somebody's gonna like listen long enough to know what a babaylan is. I'm just gonna say like this is what you need to know. Quick as so like accessibility wise, that's what I do it. But like in general, when I like in Hainai, she says a lot of words I just simply don't explain because like you can get it from the context, or she will say something that she'll say it in English, but in such a way where it's like very very natural. But then I also on the finale, like mid act finale of like a couple of episodes ago, I straight up just did an entire scene, a 6-minute scene, all in Tagalog. And I was just like, no, you're fine. Like you'll get the vibes, you'll hear the scary sounds and whatever. But I'm just gonna have this entire scene in Tagalog, and you can Google the translation somewhere. It's up there on the Patreon on public mode. So it's like it's a nice thing because I do want to reach out just enough so people are interested in kind of like the context, and then I'm like, well, let me throw you into Tagalog speaking characters. It's fun. It's great. You'll have fun.
This reminds
I
me
think
of
it's
one.
great.
Oh, yes.
That's how I deal with the Not Quite Dead has a lot of French in it, which is another so I speak a bunch of languages conversationally, where if I'm speaking to a person who speaks that language fluently, I can like get by in the conversation with a bit of like squinting, like could you clarify that, and then they'll get back to me. And French is one of those languages for me, and so there's a lot of French in Not Quite Dead, and the character that uses French, he uses French how I kind of when I'm speaking to my siblings, how we use Welsh. And it's just kind of like a feature of the way that I speak, is that I'll occasionally use Welsh words. They just kind of get rolled in there. And I think I think that's the best way to approach it, honestly, is to just kind of be like, you got Google.
Yeah, exactly. And I
You do
think
it.
like as a kid who read a lot of English and, English stories, there were like I think even especially for younger kids, they're learning a lot of words, so regardless of what language it is, they're gonna learn. So that really helps in like literary sense. Like you don't have to worry that somebody won't know what this word is, because that's kind of everyone who is on their reading journey. They'll find a word in their own language that they don't know, and they'll find out later what it means, and then they'll find a word they don't know in another language, and they'll find out what it means, and it's kind of the same journey anyway. And so obviously not throwing them into a fully a fully different language, but like kind of having the context to understand like what it is in that moment, they can figure it out. People are smart, especially people who have the wherewithal to like read and learn about something. And I just want to bring up very quickly, if we're at 4:25, if someone needs to leave soon, you can just kind of interrupt and let me know. But other than that, we'll keep going. Go ahead, Ella.
Oh, sorry. Wow, you are so observant. I thought that I'd only made like a small motion to speak, and it was not as subtle as I thought it was. I was just to agree with you, but to say it reminds me of one of my favorite episodes of Seen and Not Heard, which is a wonderful show by Kara Minks about being a deaf Jewish person, and Kara was making a point about how important transcripts are for hard of hearing and deaf people. And so the special bonus episode of that show is two people talking to each other in sign language.
Hell yeah.
Good luck.
So
and it's just like 20 minutes, and then at the very end there's like one speaking like line, and it's just like, if you don't have the transcript, well, I mean, learn sign language. But also I was going to say that like obviously both Motzi and Eira, you both provide transcripts, right? So it's like, even if someone is like, oh, I'm not sure how to spell that or how to look that up, there is a document, you can look at it, you can look it up, like, it's completely possible. And then just the last thing I was going to say was well, I mean, I guess, and we do that in Camlann a bit as well, because, like, yeah, I mean, like Eira said, everyone I know who is bilingual, whether it's, like, most of the people I know who are bilingual are, like, Welsh English, French English, or weirdly Swedish English. I know a lot of Swedish people, but, like, we'll just occasionally, like, pepper in, like, small words or phrases, like, at kind of, like, certain moments, and so there's bits in Camlann where, like, characters will, like, refer to each other by endearments or say, like, little things in Welsh to each other, but it's, like, we don't need to gloss this, we know what it is from context. But no, what I was going to say is, for people watching who are just interested in folklore, Eira and I were playing a TTRPG earlier this week called Zhang She, which is an amazing RPG by Banana Chan, who is a Chinese American game designer. So Zhang She is Zhang She: Blood in the Banquet Hall. It's basically like a gothic horror version of Spirited Away that is set within the Chinese American community in 1920 San Francisco. And it's really, really cool. But one of the awesome things about it in terms of mechanics, to kind of bring it back to all the relevance, is like, your abilities, one of the abilities is like passing. If you're like the grandkid, you get advantages to like talking to like white kids and stuff. One of them is like New World, because you understand more about like America and stuff. And then the other thing is that every single character, the idea is you play a family running a Chinese restaurant. And then at night you have to fight off demons, the Zhanshe, the hopping vampires. But every character has like a level of like reading, writing, listening, and speaking comprehension in both English and Cantonese. But like the grandma, for example, her Cantonese is amazing, her English is really bad, and the grandkid, their Cantonese is really bad, but their English is really good, and you have to make a roll to see whether or not like you can understand each other and like what language you're speaking in. And so there are times where like whilst we were playing, like there'd be a moment where it's really important for a character to explain to someone else, and it'd be like, oh shit, my wife's Cantonese isn't good enough to understand what is being said right now. Okay, let me switch to English to explain it to her. But like, oh no, now I'm in trouble because I'm speaking English in front of this like old lady who's Cantonese, and she's like, you're being rude, like stop it. And it's just like, it kind of like, it's a beautifully designed game for like exploring a lot of these themes of like culture and folk culture, and also like the game book has like loads and loads of information about Chinese culture, Chinese American culture. So just like, yeah, if people are interested in these themes, strongly recommend getting your hands on the TTRPG Jansha, Jiangshi, Blood of the Banquet Hall by Banana Chan.
That's awesome. I'll quickly read some comments. Hi, Alex. Alex said hi. I just want to make sure to say hi. And Flamefire Nut says, as someone whose first language is not English, being thrown to a different language is exactly how I learned English. Awesome. And then Pokemon does not have a Dutch translation, so I just had to learn as a kid. Awesome. That's also how I not learned English, but that's how I got really good at like an American accent, just cartoons. And then Turnabout is fair play and transcripts are so great to have for many reasons, says Shy Magpie. So true. And Cherry Mecha says, that sounds really fun, referring to the TTRPG. So that's really awesome as well. Let me just make sure that the YouTube chat isn't... Okay, there we go. And just very quickly, I want to bring up, because I always forget to do this in the middle of the stream, we are doing the stream so I can raise 125% of our goal for the fundraiser for Hainai, because the 125% is to achieve a wonderful little bonus episode, a really sweet bonus episode where an immortal old man with a dark past and like a lot of like years of just isolation gets to spend time at a Christmas market with this lovely young trans barista who is in love with him, and they just have a lovely time. It's going to be great. It's going to be very heartwarming. It's the last bit of heartwarming stuff you'll get in a while, because things are going to get wild in Hainai. So yeah, if you want to support Hainai and make sure that we get to that bonus episode, please donate at the link in the chat. And thank you so much for being here. And yes, so so mythology and folklore. It's 4:30. I just want to make sure everyone 4:30. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,
9:30.
9:30. I just want to make sure I keep everyone's time in mind. But yes, so I guess my next question is, or I guess like, because we've been talking about mythology, folklore, and culture, I want to get into some fun little a little more lighthearted, or at least like silliness, which is monsters. What tell me a little bit about, we did talk a little bit about vampires at the beginning, but are there any particular monsters related to your podcast, or is there something just a monster you want to talk about, or monster thoughts you have?
So I thought, I was like, I bet this question comes up. So I had a little pre-think.
Good.
I was thinking there's one episode of Monstrous Agonies where one of the letters is from someone whose boyfriend is really upset with them because they were playing a game and they were like, what famous monster would you invite for dinner? And they're like, Nessie in the world of Monstrous Agonies is like Beyonce. she's right up there, and like someone had like they were like naming them. I think that was the one where I said that Saoirse Ronan was a werewolf, like just in passing. And the boyfriend got really upset because their partner said that he wasn't really famous as a monster, even though there's people selling t-shirts with his name on and all of this kind of stuff, and like blurry photos of him. And that was he's like the Beast of Bodmin kind of guy. He's based on these big cat legends that they have in England, which crack me up. Like, I cannot get enough of big cat sightings in England. So for anyone who doesn't know, the English countryside, the biggest thing we have is a badger. Like, there is nothing. Like, we have decimated our ecosystem in England. Like, it is just a country of lawns, basically. And there's nothing big. There's nothing scary. Like, nothing will eat you. There's nothing, right? But since I think it started in the 1950s. One of the reasons I like it is because it's quite new. Is since the 1950s, people have been like, there's a cheetah loose in Somerset, and you're like, there isn't, and they're like, there is. There's a panther in Derbyshire, and you're like, no, there fucking isn't. And they're like, maybe there is though. And there are these websites. I love websites of like weird fans of things and like obsessive people, and they're sharing their photos of their big cat sightings. You're like, that is a fat house cat in a field. That is not a tiger. That's not what that is. And they are my favorites because it's like, you know, I love the stuff where it's like, oh, we can do so much with werewolves. We can do so much with vampires. Like so many cultures have an idea of like an undead person coming back to life, and like all of these interesting things that can tell you about their world and their worldview and their culture and everything. But like the fact that like from about the 1950s, people in Surrey just decided to sort of start pretending that there were escaped panthers on
That's
the
so cute.
moors.
That's really
You know, like,
adorable.
it's so good. And because like all of the experts are like, if there was a panther loose in Surrey, we would know immediately. Do you have any idea how much panthers eat? That the the wildlife would be decimated. We absolutely cannot support a secret panther. This is not true.
That's really cute.
But
I'll,
yeah,
I'll
I love them.
I'll quickly read some chats again. Hi, YFM Studios. Thanks for coming by. Still fan Alex says, that last bit sounds ominous. Cherry Mecha says, yeah, hey, Motzi, that's frightening. I'm like, well... Anyway, go, yeah, help us get to 125 so you have more happy episodes. Flamefire Nut says, in the Netherlands right now, people are so scared because one wolf was in the country. Valid.
The whole country?
One, yeah, the whole, I guess so. Somehow it got there. YFM Studios says, extra chonk cat, exactly. And catwick.com says, Lamau, my 6-year-old teacher, normal guy otherwise, showed us his folder of his garden panther sighting documentation, and he was convinced there was a big cat at the edge of his property.
I love them.
Love that. Whereas, like in like North America places, you see people who just like run into bears, and there's just like getting near their dogs, and they're like, "We have to punch the bear." I'm sorry, like, yeah. Or like you have to scare
like,
the bear.
I think I saw a mountain lion, and you're like, "It's probably a mountain lion."
Yeah, that's definitely a mountain lion. There was a lady who like there was a bear near her dog, and she like ran out and she pushed the bear. She straight up like because it was like on the side of a wall, and to be fair to the bear, it was protecting its baby, and they were like not sure. They seemed like pretty chill otherwise, but the dog was barking, and the bear was like coming near it, and then this lady just straight up shoves the bear, and then grabs her dog and runs away. And I'm like,
I read a Reddit Ask Me Anything years ago of a woman who got like attacked by a bear, and she had basically gone like, I'm gonna die, this is how I'm gonna die. And she said her head was in the bear's jaw, and she looked into its eyes, and she describes being like, and it didn't even care. It wasn't even sorry. And that made me so mad. And she like jabbed her thumb in its eye and like managed to escape. And just the idea of being like, oh well, I guess I'm gonna get eaten, and then being like, you're not even enjoying this.
Yeah.
Hey.
That's one of my favorite films. Is a film, a Werner Herzog film, Grizzly Man, about a man who was obsessed with bears and lived out with bears. And there's this great quote in it. I'm going to absolutely butcher my Werner Herzog impression now. He goes, I look into the eyes of the bear and I see nothing. I see no friendship. I see only the cold, emotionless eyes of a killer. And I'm like, yeah, it's a bear.
That's awesome. I love how Grizzly Man just said that. He's like, yeah, no, this is like, and that's why he knows the bear. Like, that's why he understands bears. Not necessarily because they don't feel. It's just because, like, you cannot mistake an animal for having human feelings necessarily. So, like, someone who lives with, like, someone who has that wisdom can, I think, survive living with bears for a long time.
Well, the thing with Grizzly Man is that he really didn't understand that, and then he got
he got act. Okay. I guess Werner. I thought he was the one who said
bears, which to me is a big red flag for somebody who's obsessed with bears and lives with them. And it's like, you've got a collection of teddy bears. I'm like, I'm a bit concerned that they're going to eat you because you think that they're for hugging.
My favorite kinds of like animal guys who are like living with wolves and bears and like big cats and stuff. They're the ones who say like, I might die. It'll happen sometime. I'm still happy with my life. Like, they're not because they think the animals are like pets, but because they're like, I'm working with a wild animal, and at some point one of them might just eat, what might just kill me, and that's fine. Like, this is like, I am aware that this could happen, and we are taking precautions about it. But I'm happy with this situation. Like, I love that for them. I do know at least one like wildlife guy who did die from a hog, that like from an actual wild boar that he had, and he had the same attitude. He was like, well, I guess it did happen. It was likely, but I was pretty lucky for most of my life. I'm like, well, I'm glad that guy died doing what he loved, I guess, but still sad.
He died doing what he loved,
yeah,
to be eaten
yeah.
by a giant pig.
Exactly. Oh, he wasn't eaten, he was
I,
gored. But yes, go on, Eira, sorry.
I was reading about people who study Humboldt squid, which are a terrifying thing. I take some time for out of your day someday to look up Humboldt squid and how they hunt. And I was reading about people who study them, and they're all very much like, oh no, they don't care. They'll just eat us. They're like the most likely sea creature to hunt humans. They just don't. They're just like, oh, delicious.
Delicious.
I think it's really. And on that spectacular note, I am going to have to dip, unfortunately.
No worries. Thank you
but
so much for
this
joining.
has been really lovely, and I hope you make it to 125% so that your listeners can have their souls soothed.
Yeah, have a
the
little bit more
comfort.
happiness before bad things start happening. Thank you so much for joining us, and yeah, you can just leave the call, and we will continue on this screen. Thank you.
Awesome.
Have a good
Bye.
night. Rest well. Bye bye.
And you. Bye.
And yes, we are still here, the three of us, three left, and then there were three. And I will say it's very funny. We were like talking about I asked about monsters, and we're talking about animals, but that's kind of how it goes, right? Like, that's where the mythology comes from.
I have a monster. I have a monster.
Yes.
So for me, like, a big thing that I always find really fascinating is so little bit of relevant context. My dad was a pilot. He was in the Air Force. As a result, I traveled around the world a lot as a child. So I went backpacking through India and Vietnam, and I've never been to the Philippines. I've been to Thailand, and I've been to Malaysia, and I've been to Bali, and I've been to a lot of East Asia. I lived in Hong Kong for a few years, etc. And I also encountered so much racism, especially among the so-called expat, really immigrant communities. Which, yeah, we don't need to go into that. We are on the happy side of the stream. But something that I always found really fascinating from childhood was that often, specifically, English folkloric creatures, they're just not that scary. And so I was always like trying to find like actually scary like folklore creatures. Ireland has a lot of great folklore creatures. Like, Irish culture has a lot of like properly scary folklore. But then, like, really outside of that, you gotta get out of the UK. Really, like, it's just not that scary. And like, a lot of places that I had the fortune and privilege to go to in like East Asia and Southeast Asia and South Asia and like different countries in Africa had like really properly scary folklore, and I was just always like, I want scary folklore. I want something like the vampire with the intestines that strangles people. Like, that's a great one. Like, so on my quest to find actually scary folklore from these islands, I have two favorites. One of them is the Nakelavar. So this is a very obscure Scottish creature.
The horse?
And basically what it is, it's a centaur with no skin.
Yeah.
So it's a skinless centaur that eats people, so it like lurks and like,
Nuckalavee. Yeah, I didn't know it was pronounced that way, but yeah, like the horse, the horrible horse centaur. Was it a centaur? Is it like a person? Is it like a human and horse merged together?
Yeah, so
like it looks like a horse and rider, but yeah.
Yeah, but no skin.
No skin.
And the way it's kind of described by like people who like, sightings is like, you can see all its intestines and stuff, and it comes and eats you, and that's just fucking great. I just love how gribbly it is. And then outside of that, like, to be honest, like one of my recent favorite folkloric creatures was one of the ones we used in Camlann, which was I described the series as a Monster of the Week series quite a lot, and then I wrote the scripts and I sent them to Ross, who is our production manager and was script editing, and he was like, Ella, you've described this as a Monster of the Week series, and there's an episode where there isn't a monster. which is a problem. And I was like, oh fuck, I forgot the monster. Okay, so I like went back and I was like, okay, we're gonna try and figure out what monster is gonna be here. And I found this really interesting story, which was a bastardization of the Will-o'-the-Wisp myth. So we're familiar with Will-o'-the-Wisps, right? Like, it's a light that you see in the darkness when you're going home, and if you're really cold and hungry, and then there's this light, and if you follow the light, you're like, oh, maybe it's a light on in a window, and maybe if I get there, I'll be like brought inside, and someone will give me food, and I'll be warm. But really, like, the Will-o'-the-Wisp just tempts you further into the darkness and further into getting lost, and you get lost in the swamps. And then this theme comes up a lot throughout, like, British literature of the last few thousand years. It's in Lord of the Rings, or like the Dead Marshes, and also like it seems to probably have a pretty likely natural phenomenon, which is its cause, which is that England has a lot of massive swamps and fens, which have a lot of natural gases and things like peat, and so probably what was happening was just like little flickers of flame from like methane and stuff. But the thing is, if you, like, for example, our fens in particular, which have been drained, but for hundreds of years we had this massive part of the UK, because we are a small island, there was this very, very dangerous cold swamp. And that's very flat and very hard to tell, like, the landscape, and you don't know how deep it is, and there are some parts of it that go very, very deep because of caves underground, and some parts it floods regularly by the sea, and so you can easily drown and just disappear forever if you get lost in the fens. And so this was like a famously dangerous part of England, full of mist and fog and then strange lights in the dark. So you can see, of course, like, why ghost stories kind of come up about these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So this monster that I found, it's called the Lantern Man, and basically, well, the Lantern Man, I love him. He's just a zombie who beats you to death. Like, so basically, the whole premise of the Lantern Man is if you are traveling at night alone in the dark, you know, and when we're pre-cars, we're pre-industrial revolution, you're traveling at home alone at night on your horse or on foot, and you've got a torch. If you have a torch and it's dark, the Lantern Man will find you and will kill you, because only he can have a lantern. So anyone with a light in the darkness, you got to put out your torch, otherwise the Lantern Man will get you. And so it's very much this kind of like immortal undead being, which is only distinguishable as having like a massive coat and a big old oil lantern, and you know he's coming for you because you see this huge humanoid figure with a lantern, and then we'll try and beat you to death. And I'm like, that's fucking great.
That's awesome.
Spooky.
Hilarious.
I love that.
Like, he's not luring you. He's not. You know,
he just finds
he's
you.
gonna kick the shit out of you.
Flamefire Nut says,
You
shake.
stole his bit.
Yeah, shaking my head. Lantern Man is gatekeeping light. Exactly.
Yeah, no, literally, that is exactly what he is doing.
Yeah.
And it's really fun because, you know, I mean, contextually, A, this is obviously a bastardization of the Will-o'-the-Wisp myth, but B,
It's awesome.
the stories we have about it are from the 1700s and 1800s, and all the people who said they were attacked by the Lantern Man, like, most of them survived, so they just turned up in town, like, completely covered in bruises and, like, very heavily injured. People would be like, what happened? They'd be like, I got attacked by the Lantern Man. And I really want to know what actually happened to these young men, that this was, like, a less embarrassing explanation than just...
I think it would be even funnier if it was just literally a guy with a lantern who beat you up when you saw another guy with a lantern.
Well, like,
It's much funnier if it's a 14-year-old girl with a lantern.
Yes!
Who is just robbing people blind.
And they're too embarrassed to say.
He's huge. He was this huge.
He was
zombie
tall.
monster.
He was
Okay, I mean,
undead.
Like,
Hero, now I have to dare you to do the kind of Goonies movie about the kids who set up this con, like, to be the Lantern Man, and it's kind of a horror comedy.
Don't worry, everyone will be so embarrassed. Nobody will ever say.
Yeah, but it's like it is funny. It's one of those moments where I love folklore, but it's one of those moments where you can really see how this happened, because like the sightings are all quite close together. They're all in the same place. Bunch of men come into the town and have gotten beaten up. So let's be real. What's happening is there was a guy with a lantern who was beating the shit out of
Yeah, exactly. Or multiple
like,
guys even. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. But like, I love that this evolved into like a folk myth that like even today, like in that village, people would be like, "Oh, you don't want to travel at night with a lantern because like you'll get attacked by the Lantern Man." And I'm just like, yeah, that's beautiful. So that's a favorite monster. But also Nickelaba. I love a skinless centaur.
Yeah,
he's so gross.
So gross. I loved seeing that.
Away.
Yeah.
By that I mean his organs. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah, Hero. Do you have any?
How do his organs stay?
They're just
where
staying in.
Magic.
It was a dumb question.
the forces of malevolence that keep it that make it move around, I guess.
It just doesn't.
Evil cares a lot about presentation.
Yeah.
You know, at a convenient and suitably horrifying moment, I think probably organs start dripping like heavily out of him, but then they always like slip back in for convenience because like he has to be able to do his monstrous business.
They
They schloop. They're so terrifying. I love them though. I'll say like for people who are who want to listen to Hainai but don't know if they can do the entire like 60 something episodes. There are episodes called Remind Me to Tell You Later, which mostly deal with like Mary's experience in the Philippines, and they're mostly about Filipino monsters, and they're kind of standalone. So it's like those are the ones you can listen to if you're worried about like listening to the whole thing at once. But those are the ones where I get to have a lot of fun. Like not only do I use like Filipino mythology creatures, I also just use like straight up ghost stories I knew as a kid, or experiences I had as a child. I was in a particularly very haunted school, and I make it like the focal point of one of our episodes about a haunted nun, a peeping nun. This is like a known like urban legend where in this particular bathroom you may look up and see a nun like looking at you in the bathroom stall, but then when you look down she has no feet. And so it is like that's one of those things like oh my god. There was like in that same school there was a bathroom with no mirrors, and we were like, why are there no mirrors in this bathroom when every other bathroom has a mirror? And they're like, you don't want a mirror in that bathroom. And I'm like, okay, cool. Okay. We're not putting mirrors in that bathroom. Yeah, it's great. It's like, it was awesome because I was like, okay, cool. I'm not gonna ask again. I'm not going to that bathroom again. And then there was another like thing. This was so funny. So I was our music room in high school was supposedly very haunted. And so like there were sightings of like a creepy like black shadow child in like under one of the tables. There's like a back room where they store things and people, and there's movement there sometimes whether or not somebody's in there. And the best one was we were practicing choir, and there was during choir practice the bathroom door opened, and the bathroom door has two doors, so someone could come into the other side of the door. But when the bathroom door opened, there was no one inside, and we were like, okay, cool, it's just like off the hinges. I went to close the bathroom door and I like secured it, and here's the thing, it's a secure door. It's not like one that'll just slip back open. And then like throughout the choir practice, it opened 2 more times, and there is no way a person could have been there. Like nobody, you don't hear running, you don't hear anything. It just opened 2 more times on its own, a door that you have to twist to like open. And all of us were like looking at each other like we're like, nope, no. And then at the end of it, everyone was like kind of giggling nervously. And at the end of it, our choir master was like, 2 girls stay with me while we close the music room. And like the rest of you can go. The president, the lead, like the 2 class reps and whatever, like you will stay with me while we turn off all the lights and turn off everything in the music room. That was like, yeah. me too, lady. Like that was so funny, and we were all like, let's go.
That's too scary. I'm not doing this on my own.
Exactly. She's like, no, yeah, like we'll be a team, because it's either the students stay to close everything down or the teacher does. And she's like, no, we're staying together.
Let's just do it together.
Yeah, we're doing it together.
I definitely like. I'm like, I if people ask outright, like, do you believe in like ghosts and stuff? And I'm like, no. But if something gets a little spooky, I do immediately go like, hello, it's me. You don't have to scare me. If you want something, you may write it down. But otherwise, I am not open to being scared into doing something for you. Okay?
Yeah.
I love this. This is like the paranormal equivalent of like naming your house spider so you don't find it scary.
Yeah. Yes,
like...
literally that. Yeah. It's so funny. Yeah. And then like, so Cherry Mecha said she was not going to be alone with that haunted door. Exactly. No, like it's a haunted music room. Everyone knows it's haunted. Nobody's going to stay there when you have like 2-3 instances of like something moving on its own. No, we're not doing that. And then another one was and if you ask me, I believe in ghosts. Yes, I do. My experiences have been too real for me not to believe in ghosts. But it's very funny because another one, I was at a retreat house, a religious retreat house in the mountains. And one of my favorite things, I had 3 instances of like haunting again in that religious retreat house. And one of them is that in our room where we all shared together, there's this window that looks out upon, like, basically the outside of the window is a cliff. So there's no way to get to the outside of the window except from the inside of the room. So like it's a cliff with trees and everything. There's no balcony, there's nothing. Like you can't step out of the window. And then the next day we look at it, it has a handprint from the out, like, and it has a handprint, and I start like rubbing at it. It's from the outside of the window, which none of us have opened, and we're like, cool. Awesome. And then the second one was it was great. We had bunk beds. I was sleeping in the bunk bed, and I woke up in the middle of the night, and I take stock of all my classmates who were there, and I was like, okay, cool, everyone's here, there's that, whatever. And then the next morning, I was like, she's over here, she's down there, she's over here, she's down there. Next morning I wake up and 2 of my classmates were in the same bed, and I was like, okay, cool. Like, hey, did you sleep in your own bed last night? And she was like, no, I've been here the whole time. And I'm like, cool. Awesome. That's great. Anyway, the third one was just me in a bathroom, because it's a creepy bathroom, because it's like out in the hall, one of the lights isn't working, it's just like not a good time, it echoes quite a bit. So I'm here in this bathroom, and I start hearing knocks on the bathroom and just like sounds, and nobody's entered this bathroom, by the way. I'm the only one in that bathroom at night, and I'm just here like, no, I don't like this. I have to, like, I'll finish my business, but this is bad. Yeah. This is really bad.
This is the thing that always gets me in like horror movies, when you get like the wife who's like, I'm being haunted, and the husband's like, get over it. I'm like, I'm sorry, but no, absolutely not. If my partner came to me and was like, I think the house is haunted, I'm like, we are checking in to a hotel. We are I'm just I believe it just enough that I'm like, not going to take any chances. Absolutely not. Like, let's get out of here.
Yeah.
It's true that the real villain was the patriarchy all along, is all we're saying.
Exactly.
And the blood-eating ghost.
And also the baby ghost.
Yeah. YFM Studio says Ghost Band, and Shy Magpie says, I don't believe in fairies, but we do not insult the good folk from under the hill. Seems to have a lot of variations. Exactly. Like, why would you test that? Like, why would you?
Right.
Like,
right.
Even if you
it's
don't
like
specifically
people,
believe.
Like, kids at school doing like Bloody Mary, and I was like, absolutely not.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I don't really think that she's going to come and get us, but I'm not going to ask her to come and get me.
Exactly. No, it's a great great feeling.
One should not tempt fate, you know? Like,
absolutely not. Also, I would be so annoyed if that's how I died. Like, genuinely, if I was like, oh, this time I'll do a Ouija board or whatever, and it'll be fine, and then I get possessed and I die, and the whole time I'm just going to be mad. I'm going to be so mad about it.
Just one of those classics of like, well, sure, the one time, Murphy's Law.
Right, exactly. Absolutely not.
Yeah. And I kind of went into ghost stuff. Oh, sorry, Ella, you first.
No, you please.
Yeah, I was just saying, I kind of went into ghost stuff. Monsters, obviously, I have many favorite monsters. Ella, as you very well know, I have a monster romance comic book series, of which the latest one came out and is an erotic one. I'm picking it up tomorrow, actually. So, but the rest of them are not erotic, they're just like romance stories. They're all about Filipino monsters, so I have many favorites. My absolute favorite has to be, because I don't know, my entire personality is around this one. It's called Tikbalang, which is like a minotaur, but with a horse face, with a horse head. So that's the Tikbalang. Oh, I went blurry. No! Anyway, the Tikbalang is my favorite creature, just because a friend of mine who does comics did a version of a Tikbalang character who I completely fell in love with. So that's kind of like my favorite. However, like on a conceptual level, so here he is. This is my favorite boy. He has a Gatling gun for a right arm. It's great. Post-apocalyptic, but with very, yeah, it's kind of silly, but in the best way possible. You know, here's another picture. No mystery why this one became my favorite. Anyway, so the second one is the Manananggal, which is the one of the viscera suckers of Philippine folklore. And this is the interesting thing because I have to differentiate between gods and mythology, but I feel like monsters are a little harder to pin down, and so they become the Philippine mythology. They become the Filipino folklore because the monster stories are so, and there are regional differences, but in general, like people accept that most of these monsters are so, are so self-contextual that any place can have them. So they don't necessarily all belong to like one place. Although some of them do have like regional like specificity. And yeah, in the case of Manananggal, a really funny one is like why Manananggal became a thing. It's because the Philippines has giant bats that are like this big. And so like they are adorable and they're fruit eating. So they're just like big, they're flying foxes. They're like big cats. They're just friends. And they're so cute. But they are not that cute when you see a big thing of wings like on top of a telephone pole flapping around at night, and it's like or at like at sunset. So you understand, like, especially when you are feeling a little uneasy at night, almost human-sized thing with wings. So that's the other part. Like they cut themselves in half, and the upper part flies around and looks for small animals and pregnant women, so that they can eat the small animals and or the suck the newborn out of or suck the fetus out of the lady. And that's a fun one. And you can tell, like, they're meant to be half bodies of people because that is about the size of a giant bat. And obviously,
like I'm making the connection.
exactly, you're making the connections. They have bat wings, and also like they are meant to explain, like, yeah, like miscarriages. They're meant to explain like small animals like getting eaten, like sudden child deaths, like all that. So it's like always connected to like what the context was. But also, person who flies around with their upper body while their lower body is like hanging around somewhere, it's fun because there's also a way to kill them, which is to find their lower body, to pour salt or spices on it or garlic to prevent them from reattaching, so that when the sun comes up they die from the sun, because they can walk around in the daytime if they are attached, but if they're unable to attach, they're gonna die. So that's kind of how the Manananggal myth works. And in the daytime, they can just be people. They can just be normal people. And so, but there are ways to kind of tell if they're a monster, aswang or Manananggal, which is basically like if you look in their eyes and your reflection is upside down, I think is what it was. Or if they don't have a philtrum, which is, I don't know why, but that's another thing. If they don't have a philtrum, they're most likely a monster or an aswang. And I'm like, it's a very well thought out like folklore, and everyone kind of knows it more than they know about mythology, which is what I love about like Philippine monsters. They're just so cool and they're so freaky.
They genuinely are awesome monsters, and I love Hainai for that. Like I really love like both the like the standalones and the serialized story is just like, yeah, this is so cool. Every single time I'm listening, I'm just like, oh my god, I didn't even know that one. Like, and then I go look it up, and it's just like, also, can we just like actually footnote? When we were talking earlier about like translating or explaining stuff or not, I'm like, excuse me, this might just be the autism coming out, but one of the great joys of engaging with media is then Googling afterwards for like several hours.
Yeah.
Like, how could you deprive yourself of that joy?
Exactly. No, it's so fun. And I just want to say, Fractal Fan Alex says, is it Tikbalang likely to appear in Hainai? Possibly, one day. Flamefire Nut says, I'm just imagining the conversation. Hi, can I stare closely into your eyes? No romance, just checking if you're a monster. Could be. And yeah, it's so much fun. And Philippine monsters are also a very popular topic of like Philippine comics and like Filipino storytelling. There used to be this like, there's so many like features on news channels where during like the Halloween era time, because we don't necessarily celebrate Halloween, but we celebrate Undas, which is like going to the province to visit the dead. So it's like kind of like Dia de los Muertos, but less like colorful. It's just more of like a go to the province, eat some good food, visit your dead loved ones. But we do have like a nice, like, we do like the creepiness around that time, so it's still like a Halloween feeling. And a lot of news channels would talk about like would have features about like Filipino horror stories and Filipino monster stories, and they're great. Like they're like, here's the evidence of this horror of this ghost sighting, and it's a news channel, but they're like, this is we have to talk about the ghosts, we have to talk about the monsters, and it's so good because everyone's like, it's late, it's evening news, and everyone's like, tell us about the ghosts and the monsters, please. I love them so much. It's they're my favorite thing. It gets you into the mood. Oh, I will say it's 5 o'clock. You guys can stay on. You can both stay on, but I'm gonna start talking about Philippine mythology in general and like Tagalog gods. And just so I can like, kind of make sure that this stream stays on. But what are you feeling right now? Because it is like the last hour, and I know that some of you said you can't stay for the whole thing.
Yeah, I am a little disabled, so I'm flagging a little bit. So I think I'm gonna jump into the chat instead. But thank you very much for having me. It has been such a joy. Like Moxie, you are such an interesting and brilliant storyteller, and it's always really fun hearing you nerd out about mythology and folklore. And Hero, I like for the people watching, me and Hero have never talked to each other like this.
Ella suggested Hero. That's the funny part.
Yeah.
Ella suggested Hero, but go on, yes.
I'm a fan. A lot of being working in podcasting is just being like, I'm a fan of this person. I would like to talk to them.
But it's also such a small industry that you can also just be like, come and talk to me.
Exactly.
I want to talk to you, so we're gonna talk.
Yeah, exactly. And if we want to like, obviously we make art, but we also have to make content to feel that art. And sometimes talking to friends is just nice content. It's like so. It all feeds into it. I'll say goodnight. I'll also say goodnight to Flame Fire Nut on the chat, who says that they're gonna leave as well. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you so much, Ella.
I'm gonna scoot as well.
Yes, and thank you, Hero. No, it's wonderful to see all of you. I will take the last hour to talk about Tagalog mythology. So if you stick around, you can hear about that and like things how it relates to Hainai. Thank you all so much, and I hope you have a good night. Thank you for joining me so late in the UK.
Thank you for having us.
Bye. Yeah, you can just leave the call, and yes, thank you. Awesome. Okay. Yes, let me take a look at the chat to make sure that I'm not missing anything. Thank you everybody who's been chatting so far. That's why I look, like, if you see the video, I keep looking down. It's because I'm looking at the chat to make sure everyone's been, making sure that everyone's words are paid attention to. But now I'm going to be talking about Filipino mythology. Let's go. So, and how it relates to Hainai. So, first thing I want to bring up is that I have a bunch of books here, and one of them is this, the Diccionario Mitológico de Filipinas. So it's like certain things, like I have a lot of resources about Philippine mythology. I also have other books in here. But all that being said, I kind of do remember most of it. So I'm just going to talk about how Hainai incorporates Tagalog mythology specifically to the podcast. And one of the things that I established from the very beginning is that Mary has a connection to Tagalog gods. And the Tagalog gods are, I just realized I could probably switch over to a webcam. Let's see what happens. But in general, Tagalog gods are a specific like type of the Tagalog is a region in the Philippines where the language Filipino comes from. So if you're hearing Filipino and you're wondering like if Tagalog is the correct term or Filipino is the correct term, they kind of both are, although Filipino is more of like 80% Tagalog, if that makes sense. And I'm just looking for the webcam portion now that I think about it. Here we go, video capture device. Yeah. Ignore me, I'm just doing some quick, let me just, sorry, one sec. I just want to make sure that everything's good. Is that correct? Is it? Is it not? I just want to make sure that it's all working. Okay, give me a moment. I'm going to try to like switch off. And look, sexy fruits. Sorry, one moment. Okay, let me test my video capture device. Let me turn that off. Will be in darkness for a second here. HD webcam. Defaults. Nope, it's not working. Will it work? Will it not work? Let's see what happens. I just want to make sure that everything is good, but it's not. Okay. It is not, in fact, working. Let's see, OBS virtual camera. Nope. HD webcam. Nope. Oh, wait, there you go. Okay, yeah, it was connected to the Discord call. Oh, look at me. Okay, transform, fit to screen. Here I am. Yes, I am here now in a little bit more HD. Oh no, now we can see your Discord. Hi Ella. Yes, absolutely. We can see and hear me. That's good. Okay, I'm gonna chat about Tagalog gods now. So the first thing you need to know is that Tagalog is the language of Filipino. It is 80% of what makes up Filipino. The rest is like approximately 80%. I'm kind of pulling that number out of my butt. But Tagalog gods are basically part of the language and culture from which Filipino comes from. And even though most Filipinos have speak Filipino, they have their own languages from their own regions. Whereas I speak Tagalog because my region is Tagalog, but also my nanay is from the Bisaya region, and so I have those like two things to like think of. If I'm sounding a little distracted, it's because the webcam is actually in mirrored from from the Discord call, so that's why. But either way, an interesting thing about Tagalog gods is that they are mentioned in some secondary sources, some prime but very few of them are mentioned sort of altogether. There are a few experts who have like compiled like names and their roles and their family relationships and what they do as Tagalog gods, but they don't have stories necessarily. A lot of the stories are either made up very recently, or they at least a couple of them have stories, but most of the time you just know them as gods, what they do, and their family relationships. And I will quickly bring up a document because I actually have been working on a document to kind of talk about the gods that I've mentioned in Hainai. I'll bring that up right now just so I can read through it, and I will release it at some point, don't worry. But I'll read a little bit of this intro because it's very helpful. So it says, Mary Datuin, our main character, worships the gods of her tatay or father, who is from the Tagalog region of Batangas, which is actually where my tatay comes from. Her tatay was a Catholic missionary, with Catholicism being the majority religion in the Philippines. Her nanay or mother is a babaylan, a shaman or spirit medium who has, in her time, provided healing and curses alike, and invokes the gods of the Bisaya region where she is from. So, the fact that she is a Catholic missionary had a wife and that was a babaylan who worshipped and venerated Bisaya gods might seem confusing to some. But in countries like the Philippines, where Catholicism is deeply ingrained, it isn't surprising to see how folk traditions mix together, such as folk healers using ostensibly Catholic imagery in their anting-anting or agimat, amulets or charms. So a lot of because the Philippines was colonized by the Spanish for 400 years, 400? Yeah, 400 years. A lot of our cultural influence was influenced by the lifestyle, but also the religion. So Catholicism and folk beliefs, folk religions mixed together, and that is seen in a lot of the even now the acts of babaylan, which are spirit mediums and healers, and also someone called albulario, which are medicine men. So you see especially even in Mary's own pendant, which is called an anting-anting. It has some eye imagery, it has some stuff like that, but a lot of them have cross imagery, a lot of them have Illuminati image, things that are from the Roman Catholic Church, but are presented in such a way that's more folk Catholicism, which is really interesting. And I think Mary is technically even though she worships Tagalog gods, she also still has a bit of Catholicism in her, because that's kind of how she grew up. And it's it's an interesting way to kind of show that even if the Catholic religion is not the homegrown religion, it has been there for so long that it's kind of mixed into the belief system. And that's always something I want to make sure mythology is a living thing, and so we kind of start absorbing things from that kind of shows the context of the nation that we're from. And Catholicism is a big part of the Philippines. Let me sorry, I'm looking at my chat just to make sure everyone's good. All right. In many pre-colonial religions of the Philippine Islands outside of Islam, the practice was that of animism. So people who don't know, animism, the belief that gods and spirits were present in everyday objects and phenomena. A similar version of this, or something that's a lot more like prominent, is Japanese like belief in kami, and like in just in spirits and souls and gods of different like objects and elements and animals, and just like knowing that there's like sort of a living soul in certain things. It transformed into mascot culture in Japan. Well, not transformed, because there's still like the actual like Shintoism and religion, but there is also like, I think part of that did influence mascot culture, because if everything has a soul, then having a mascot for a thing is like not that far off, which I find really interesting. Not as many people know about pre-colonial Philippine religion, although there has been like a new and huge boost in recent times because of an interest in sort of like, recapture, like kind of recapturing Philippine identity and our mythology and folklore, and kind of just making sure that our identity outside of colonialism is preserved and like emphasized. So there has been like a renewed interest in Philippine mythology, and of course with the rise of like the internet and people being able to like access more resources and knowing what books to look at, I've been able to like buy a lot of really new books, which I'm really happy about, of Philippine mythology, just so I can have a resource and like cite my sources and look at like the actual things that talk about Tagalog mythology. The other thing is I specialize in Tagalog mythology because I don't want to kind of treat it like a monolith, but I also, because I kind of learned about Tagalog mythology early on and I kind of fell in love with the characters there. I say characters, again, they don't have stories necessarily, but they have roles and traditions associated with them. And I will bring up some of these right now. One is Anagolay. So throughout the story of Hainai, Mary mentions a few Tagalog gods. Some of those gods include Anagolay, the Tagalog goddess of lost things. Mary references the eye in her Anting-Anting as the Eye of Anagolay, so which she invokes to help her find things, answers, lost people, etc. So she wears that around her neck. It's part of her character design that she always wears this pendant. In Eflanda Hocano, I'm going to be citing my sources, Yokan Hocano. In Eflanda Hocano's notes on Philippine divinities, this is the only mention of Anagolay. They had a daughter named Anagolay, who became the goddess of lost things. When Anagolay reached maidenhood, she married Dumakulam, son of Idianali and Dumangan, with whom she had 2 children, Apolaki, who became the god of the sun, and a patron of fighters, and Dianwasalanta, who became the goddess of lovers. And then he further expands on the relationship between Tagalogs and their gods, where he says, from the union of these gods and goddesses came the order and regularity of the Tagalog world. However, as life became more and more complex as a result of the expanding social relationship between the worshippers, Bathala sent down to earth the ancestral spirits to help these different divinities administer to the needs of the people on earth. Each of these spirits had a special office. Some of them were assigned as guardians of those who fight in war, and others were given the task of protecting men from illnesses. However, as time went on, these spirits became the interceding divinities between men and the gods. They were the ones to whom sacrifices were offered whenever the people desired something. These sacrifices were performed by the Katalonan, or priest. And I put a note here, Katalonan and Babaylan are different names for the same roles depending on the region. Which is interesting, because Babaylan has become more of the prominent role, but Katalonan is the Tagalog version. So technically, Mary is a Katalonan, not a Babaylan, but her nana is a Babaylan, so... Anyway, kind of working through all the facts that I have. So that is interesting because you kind of see why Catholicism was able to be absorbed, and like why Catholicism kind of fit into the existing beliefs of Tagalogs at the time. Because the concept of Catholicism with saints and intercessors is so popular in especially like Latin sort of countries, and in the Philippines in particular, saint culture is so popular because it's kind of identical to how we were worshiping gods at the time. They're called anito, so they're considered spirits or minor gods or just like specific like gods of certain offices, and you would pray to them, but you are not allowed to pray directly to Bathala, the supreme god. He was the creator. He is the guy who like kind of runs everything. but you are not allowed to directly ask him for things. You are supposed to ask his intercessors, the other Anito, the other gods, for things. So that is kind of the hierarchy of godhood in the Philippines and in Tagalog region. And for Mary, she often asks for the intercession of Anagolay, goddess of lost things, and Lakampati. So Lakampati I'm going to go into because she's actually my favorite goddess. And there's a funny little linguistic thing that I did with Lakampati that is not like necessarily common, but I ended up doing it anyway. So, here we go. Oh, I just want to mention on Anagolay, the Eye of Anagolay is entirely my creation. I made that up. I made it up. The Eye of Anagolay is not a thing. I just decided to do it because it kind of feeds into the existing mythology, but I just want to make sure people don't confuse the mythology that's actually in the books and the one I made up. So Eye of Anagolay, it's based on the traditional anting-anting, often bearing eye imagery. As I said, the anting-anting, those lucky charms, those pendants often have eye imagery on their own anyway. And of course, like the tradition of having eye imagery in horror podcasts is, it's a thing. But since many horror podcasts have ironically involved eye imagery in Hainai, the eye is benevolent rather than malevolent. So that's a fun fact. In a lot of other places, the eye is meant to be like kind of creepy, kind of bad. Like some examples I can think of are Welcome to Night Vale, where the eye is sort of like the surveillance state that they live under, and the other one is Magnus Archives, where the eye is literally a fear, like a major fear. And it also like that intends to sort of like plunge the world into fear and like chaos and things. So I wanted the eye here, despite being a little frightening, it's actually an element of good. It's a good thing. And when you see the eye, you feel comforted by its watchful gaze rather than the terror of like being known. That's like the irony of Hainai is that, yeah, like we took that eye that is meant to be frightening in the horror podcast space and we decided this is a goddess who is making sure you're okay. She's safe. And that is actually the eye in the Hainai cover, which I have on my shirt. I didn't bring it up during the conversation. I should have, but here it is. Ta-da! Hainai cover. Oh, it's not mirrored. Like this is the actual. It's not mirrored, but yeah, Hainai cover, and you can see the eye up there. The eye is there. It's meant to be the eye of Anagolay, and it's meant to be benevolent, not malevolent. Malevolent is a podcast. Anyway. Oh, Ella says, this is also fascinating. Thank you. And Cherry Mecha says, I love that flip of the use of the eye. Exactly. Like, it's so fun. Because the eye, it's still scary, but it's scary in a way where it's not because it's bad. It's because it's like, it's like making sure you're safe. And it's a god. Gods are scary, no matter like how benevolent they are. They are scary. And Ella says, I never noticed the eye on the cover. There you go. There you go. Okay, I'm gonna go back to my document. I have a script. Yay! So the eye is benevolent rather than malevolent. Anagolay's eye, always finding lost things, always looking out for Mary in a foreign land. That's the other thing. Mary is so disconnected from her land geographically, so having that sort of connection with her gods is very important to her. And the writing on Mary's anting-anting reads the following. So I have like a reference image somewhere in our Tumblr of the writing on the anting-anting, and it says, Marilag na anak ni Lakampating Mahabagin. So it's translated as beautiful child of compassionate Lakampati. And this is a play on words because Anagolay's appearance is never described in historical records, but in this we call her beautiful. The word for beautiful also happens to be Mary's real name, Marilag, beautiful or gorgeous. So the anting-anting made specifically for her, it says Marilag na anak ni Lakampating Mahabagin. So it's saying beautiful child of Lakampati, which is Anagolay, because Anagolay is a child of Lakampati, which again I'll bring up soon. But it also means that Marilag, being Mary's actual name, means beautiful. And in sort of a way, it also says that like Lakampati is treating Mary like her own child, in that she's protecting her, she's like taking care of her, and that is sort of the whole like idea of like the play on words in this pendant. So now we're gonna go into Lakampati because Lakampati is my favorite god. And I have a favorite god, yes, as many mythology nerds might attest to. Though I have a favorite god. So the reason that I bring up Lakampati, even though Anagolay is the Eye of Anagolay, Lakampati is mentioned directly in her pendant. It is because Lakampati is the goddess of is the most compassionate god. So here's what it is. It says, another god Mary invokes is Lakampati. Versions of her name are Lakapati or Ikapati. So it can be spelled differently, it can be said differently. I say Lakampati because that was kind of the first way I learned about it. It could have just been a typo. I could be completely wrong, but it's not necessarily that the way that it's written means that I could also be completely right. It's kind of funny, but I just call her Lakampati kind of to differentiate her in my discussions. Because again, I'm using this for a fictional story, so it's fine if I have like it's slightly off the spelling, because all official spellings are different for this god. Anyway, she's the mother of Anagolay, and here's what Hokano says about her. Ikapati. So he says Ikapati rather than Lakapati, but people know it's the same goddess because of how she's described. Ikapati, goddess of cultivated land, was the most understanding and kind among the deities of Bathala. Her gift to man was agriculture. She was as the benevolent giver of food and prosperity. She was respected and loved by the people. Ikapati was said to have married Mapulon, the god of the season. And then there's another one. So there's a piece of work called Vocabulario de Lengua Tagala by Pedro de San Buenaventura, who I believe was a missionary or a priest, from 1613. So this is a document from 1613, which we are referencing Lakapati. So in this document, it says, he was the advocate of sown land, a figure of man and woman altogether. The people would give offerings of things to eat for appeasement. When they sowed, they brought their children and taught them how to say, Lakapati pakanin mo yaring alipin mo, wag mong gutumin. So that means, Lakapati, feed this servant who is yours, let them not be hungry. So in this one, Lakapati's nature as both male and female is based on idols of her having hermaphroditic traits, and was often demonized by Catholicism. Largely, she is considered a benevolent and beloved mother goddess who cares for the young. In modern days, she's seen as a symbol of transness or gender fluidity, and I refer to her as she, her, due to her characterizations as a loving mother, but ultimately, Tagalog has no gendered pronouns, so refer to her as you will. They, them would also be correct. I say she, her because, one of them is, describes her as explicitly feminine, and the other one describes her as like both male and female. And so it is like up to you how you would interpret it. In Tagalog, regardless, I would say siya, so that is like gender neutral regardless. But in sort of like characterizing her as a mother goddess, I say her. But all that being said, this god canonically is either a mother or both male and female. Either way, the one thing that like kind of unites all descriptions of Lakampati is that they or she is a compassionate god. And I'm trying to remember what the source is. I'm still gonna have to like research this properly, but one of the things I remember is that the Tagalogs would offer a bowl of rice so that to Lakampati outside their own homes, like the doors of their own homes, for like good fortune, for a prosperous household, for a good harvest. Generally speaking, she seemed to be one of the most popular gods to offer to, because she kind of like was the one they like kind of the most applicable to most people, which is that they needed to eat and they needed to like be prosperous. And so in the context of Hainai, Lakapati being the most compassionate god is sort of like, please take care of, like, would have been like the one that they would want to take care of their daughter, Mary's parents. So Lakapati is the one that they wrote onto the anting-anting Mary wears. And that's kind of that's the relationship she has. Like, she has the god, not necessarily of compassion, but the most compassionate god of the Tagalogs taking care of her in sort of that way, even though she mostly invokes Anagolay, because that's the most applicable. Looking for things is very, very applicable to your life. And again, Anagolay is the daughter of Lakapati, and Lakapati had a husband named Mapulon, who was the god of the seasons. So, like, the family structures of Tagalog gods are interesting because they don't always relate to each other. Like, why would, like, like in some mythologies, some gods like relate because like this is the god of the sun, this is the god of the moon, so yeah, blah blah blah. But in this one, it's like the goddess of good harvest and agriculture marries the god of the seasons. That makes sense. Then their kids are goddess of lost things who marries god of hunters slash mountains. I'm like, okay, cool, whatever. And then their kids is like god of the sun. I'm like, okay. And then goddess of love. I'm like, all right. It's kind of like they don't seem to connect, but they kind of do. But either way, we don't have the context of like we don't know where these stories necessarily came from. We just obviously there were oral traditions and certain people like wrote them down. But it's kind of interesting, like, but yeah, like basically Mary is good in with the family under Lakampati. And one of the other gods that she's mentioned in the story is Lakambakod. Lakambakod's fun. Lakambakod is a god of fences and swiddens. He is essentially like sort of like a god of protection, but specifically again for like agriculture and like that sort of thing. And he is a fun god because he is one of those described physically. There are very few gods in Tagalog mythology who are described physically. In the case of Lakambakod, he is described as having a penis as long as a rice stalk. So he has like essentially because he's guarding the rice, and he's the god of fences. So he has a massive dong. And not only that, it is gilded. So basically, like, his penis is covered in gold. That's what you wanted to hear about today, right? So the Kambakod, it becomes like a small like bit of like humor and levity when Mary like sort of brings out like little figurines of her gods. Ella says gilded, massive dong, exactly. So there's like a little bit of levity where she like brings it out and it's like, that is a gold penis, and she's like, yes it is. But yeah, Lakambakod is protection, so you pray to him for protection, or like you pray to him for the protection of your crops. And I believe that one of his symbols is not only the rice stalk, the fence, but also the eels. That's a fun thing. There were eels in these crops. I think it's pretty common in like rice crops, especially. I think the eels sort of like help the crops grow. So in the water where the rice is being grown, eels are often like swimming around. And so yes, his other symbol is eels because they're all long things. And his thing is long. And another fun fact that I'm gonna like, not really a tangent, it's sort of related. When I say gilded dong, could just be that they put, gold on it. Maybe they put some chains or whatever. In pre-colonial practice of Tagalogs and other like regions, there was this very common practice of piercing your penis. There were like penis piercings. There was like a whole thing. So it's very possible that in the gilded dong, it was possibly like gilded as in pierced all the way up from top to bottom with gold. That is like a culturally and historically very like a big likelihood of how his gilded dong was presented. That's fun. See, Tagalog gods are fun, and we're gonna get a little more, I think, like over time, because Mary's relationship to Tagalog folklore and mythology outside of like monsters is going to be a big part of the story. My favorite thing is I believe it was sexy podcast characters or something like that, like the one of the tumblers that like runs polls about which character is sexy or whatever. One of the things that they described Mary as was she could be a god, and I love that. It's like, it kind of like it talks about how Mary's showing different interesting things about like her power seems to be a little more than it should be. She seems to be cracking gold. Like, she seems to have some times where her skin starts cracking and there's gold. There's like moments where it's just like there's something about Mary that has not been revealed yet, Although there have been a few things, like from the beginning, we've been sort of like leading up to something that's going on with Mary. And of course, being that this horror podcast also deals with mythology and folklore, you might get a sense, you might get a hint of what that is. But we haven't gotten there yet, and people have guessed very close to what it might be, but nobody has guessed like exactly what it is, because it is like very dependent on the folklore. And so that's why I'm glad to talk about the folklore, because Tagalog mythology is kind of like underserved as far as folklore goes. Not necessarily in the Philippines, but just in general. And I love to talk about it. And I love to talk about. I mentioned this earlier, but in another stream, but I made a Tagalog god family tree in MS Paint, and it still shows up on Google when you search Tagalog gods today. It is so funny. Let me try to like bring it up. It's so funny. So if you go to Google and search Tagalog gods, and if you go to images, you will see let me like bring up this image. Sorry. Yeah, the third image, at least for me, but like in the images, you will see a black background with the roughest looking MS Paint bunch of names you'll ever see. I made that. When I was in high school, and it's still being used, and I wouldn't have it any other way. So, shy. Oh, everyone was saying gilded massive dong and golden penis. Yes, but Shy Magpie says, I'm used to U.S. monoculture farms, so I find it fascinating how many places have a proper ecosystem around their crops and not just acres of corn. Now it's awesome. Like, and obviously, like in older times, like you find different ways to make the crops like to manage the crops, and I think the eels would eat like what's the words, like pests and things. And obviously now there are pesticides, so people don't really use that, but back in the day they would just use natural means such as animals and like other things that would not harm the crops but could like keep things. And I don't know for sure, but I think there was also the way like maybe their waste and their bodies would help the crops. I forget, like someone with proper education on this could like explain it better. But yeah, like the eels around the crops and the crops themselves and the fences are all to represent his gigantic golden penis. Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, it's 5:30. We're like kind of 30 more minutes to the end of the streams. I've been streaming for almost not 6 hours, like almost 5 hours. We're getting to the last stream. I'm very excited to have pizza at the end of this. But I love talking about Tagalog mythology. I'm not necessarily one of the biggest like experts, but I am probably like someone with a fairly international audience where I love to talk about Tagalog mythology and gods. So that's a really fun thing that I enjoy doing, and I enjoy talking about and kind of pointing people to certain resources that they can do more research into it. Because I love sharing Filipino culture and Tagalog gods. So if you have questions, drop them in chat. But other than that, after this, I will be chatting about Filipino monsters, and then we will end the stream. I'm just gonna let my throat rest for a sec. I do have a trick though. I have a very cool little throat lozenge that is, if any of you have sore throats and you've tried lozenges and they don't work as well, this is what you need. So it's called Ming's Paypakwa candy. These are what you need to fix your throat. No lozenges, no other ways. If you want like the equivalent of like a honey tea, but a candy you can suck on, this is the way. Anyway, questions. Ella says, this is also cool. Apart from all the eye and gilded dong, are there any commonalities in the ways these gods are depicted visually? And do they have multiple eyes, or are they more humanoid? Not really. I mean, they are humanoid. Like, they are meant to be understood as, like, human-shaped. But there are no commonalities necessarily. Like, they are meant to be intercessors with the people and very often understood to be living among the people. So there were no like particular, like, obviously it's interesting because like the two things that you would consider, and even in the case of the Kampati, not that much, that you would consider unusual for humans is that one guy has a rice stalk length dong. That's unusual. But think like and for ikapati lakapati having like both sets of genitals, which, you know, again, like people who are intersex exist, but like in this case of that, like it was so like prominently displayed as like one of her like visual like indicators. As far as far as that goes, I think one of them is described as husky, so fat, but like I don't think any like, and obviously like the goddess of love would be considered beautiful, but ultimately most of them are just described as their roles and their, you know, what they do. Most, and I don't think any of them apart from the ones I mentioned are described with physical traits. Um I would say like uh other than, you know, like some very very vague details. um so yeah, like I mean, none of them have animal traits, and other, you know, like it's kind of like that, like some of them have some emphasized humanoid traits, but for the most part you're meant to understand them as humans, and therefore like, you know, probably looking like the people that they're around. So people have kind of like done their own interpretations of them. They can be anything. There are you know, there are like figures of them, carvings of them. I can kind of bring it up. uh and oh yeah, like, Ella says, I can't spell her name. Lakapati, the compassionate goddess. It's interesting to me because Aphrodite is often historically depicted as having both sets of genitals as well. Yeah, I think that's like common for gods and goddesses of prosperity, of fertility, because Lakapati is of fertility in the sense of both sexual fertility and also of agriculture. Okay, let me bring up quickly like images of Anito, because this is kind of, you know, there were no descriptions of them, but these are generally how the Anito were like this were depicted. They were carved. Let me see. So humanoids. Let me see. Let me bring this up. Obviously, these are much newer, much so like we don't actually know how they would have been immediately. Like they would have been described completely. And obviously, some of these are from specific areas that are not Tagalog regions. That's another thing. Um, so these are the Ifugaos. Actually, yeah, like I don't think the Tagalogs have any surviving actual like depictions of how they would have done it, but I think like the mountain peoples, like the Ifugaos, would have been, and yeah, Igorot would have been more. Let me bring this up real quick. Let me switch over to the window in which. There we go. Now I'll turn this off for a second. Turn that on for a second. There. So like that. Like, but these are more north than the Tagalogs. I don't think the Tagalogs themselves have anything, but these are like Anitos of the northern tribes, and they're called Anitos, so they would be described as like the same one. Just humanoids, like small humanoids, but humanoids nonetheless. Um, I don't know of any Tagalog specific ones, but yeah, like imagine this, like one of them, I believe there was like one where they would often hold a bowl so you can put the offerings in. That's like a description of a lot of like the Anitos, but other than that, they just be like generally humanoid shaped, carved, small, put meant to be put in your house, sort of like to pray at or pray to, or to be like a companion to you. And that's, and there were also like descriptions of certain ones that were carried around in your pocket, so they're meant to be tiny, right? So they're not going to have like a crazy amount of detail or anything. They're just meant to be these like small figures that you are praying to ensure like you know, safety, good fortune, etc., etc. Let me see if I can bring up more, but in general that's kind of like how they would look like in terms of um how they were depicted. Um, because also obviously like colonialism like erased a lot of it, but I do appreciate how much was saved as well. Sort of like, especially like with the Igorots, or the mount, like the Ifugao and Igorot, like the mountain tribe things. Um, but yeah, generally they would be like just general humanoid shapes, with made from wood. So that's also a reason why many didn't survive, because they're made from wood. Here's another one. But you'll see that they're similar to the ones you already saw. These were sketches by by certain people. There we go. What is this? Pamino Paminatan. Yeah. So things like that. So yeah, as far as like their descriptions, very few, like they don't really have physical descriptions. One or two, like one is called like husky, described as husky, so considered like a big guy. Another one has a long dong, and one of them like has both sets of genitals, and that's kind of like what we know about them, physically as far as that goes. Okay. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask them. I will bring up a couple more facts and then some monsters, and then we'll go. Because I need to order my pizza. I just realized. And, oh, yes. Oh, my gosh. I almost forgot. I'm sorry. Okay. So here's something I'm going to bring up that some of you, if you have reached a certain point of Hainai, might recognize. So, this is what we call a manungol jar. Oops. There, I'll bring it down a little bit. Or I should just scroll up on the thing. Oh, wait, there we go. No, that's wrong. That's not what I want to move. This is the one I want to move. So that's a manungol jar. So, a manungol jar is a funeral jar. And let me bring up more images because it's fun. If you remember from one of the Hainai episodes where you hear water in the background, and you hear Mary talking to Lori, which is one of her villains. And the manungol jar is kind of like what I was thinking of when I wrote that image. Basically, you know, like I don't explicitly tell you what's happening, but in my mind, they are on a boat. And Mary is essentially like talking to Lori in sort of what is considered a the funerary and like the afterlife of the Philippines, of the Tagalog region, which is like, it is considered that the afterlife happens like across a river. You have to cross a river to get to the afterlife. That's why many of the funeral jars shows the psychopomp on the boat with the soul that they are carrying. And that is why in the case of Mary going like kind of being in the other side and like nearing like where like kind of the middle place before the afterlife is on water. And that is an aspect of Mary that kind of appears in the story. We haven't gone back to that yet, but you know what I mean. And that is an interesting point because, like, obviously the Philippine Islands were covered in water. And so therefore, like, a lot of the life would have been about water and like surrounded by water. And the manungol jar is like describing like the spirit boat, quote unquote, that is on that thing. And obviously the jar is where all the remains are being kept. Ooh, there's a fun little drawing. Let me bring it up. And there is one that's a little more on top. And let me know if you have questions. I like this drawing. Look at their faces. They're not having a good time here. They're looking at you. I like that one. I like that one a lot. Look at them. They're so troubled. Yeah, and Cherry Mecha says, that's so interesting. That scene read to me as some kind of other side. Yeah, we interrupted them. We're like, excuse me, I'm bringing him to the afterlife. What do you want? And I think I don't remember, so I have to like look into this more. This is more Philippine history than mythology, but I need to look up what it is like. The jars, if they were ashes, I don't think they were ashes. I think they're just bodies. I think like, and the way that the front person who is the soul is like positioned with their arms like this and their legs up, I think that might have been how they were positioned in the jar. So that's an interesting like little detail that I just realized when I was looking at manungol jar. And of course the one in the back is the one bringing them to the afterlife. I have to like really like look up a bit more about the manungol jar and the role of the psychopomp in that. I forget if it was a god or a spirit or an ancestor or let me just look this up real quick. Yeah, and obviously it shows like maritime culture because obviously we were surrounded by water. Of course, it is like gonna be a big part of like where we like when we die. It says here. Ooh, I'm gonna read a Wikipedia page real quick. It says, Early Filipinos believe that the man is composed of a body, a life force called ginhawa, and a kaluluwa. So that's an interesting thing. This explains why the design of the cover of the manunggol jar features 3 faces: the soul, the boatman, and the boat itself. On the faces of the figures are on the prow of the boat, on the prow of the boat are eyes and a mouth. Rendered in the same style as other artifacts of Southeast Asia of that period, 2 human figures in a boat represent a voyage to the afterlife. The boatman is holding a steering paddle, while the one on his front shows hands crossed over his chest. The steersman's oar is missing its paddle, as is the mast at the center of the boat, against which the steersman would have braced his feet. So the manunggol jar image isn't even complete, but yeah, like people can kind of tell what's there. Were the jars big then? Yeah, those are pretty big. They're about as big as a kid could fit in them comfortably. And Filipinos were not that big people. Like we have grown. Like we were used to be like 4'11" or something. So it could have been just like once the body has like dried or deteriorated, they could be put in the jar. I don't remember if it was ashes or not, but yeah, either way, that's how they would have been positioned in. It says here, the manner in which the hands in the front figure are folded across the chest is a widespread practice in the Philippines when arranging the corpse. The practice of the jar burial is an instance of secondary burial, in which only the bones of the deceased are reburied. The jar itself was not interred. Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, basically the bones are reburied and it's secondary burial. So, one last thing I'll mention, because we are actually coming to the end of the stream, which is very exciting. Also because like it's been such a wonderful stream and I've been having so much fun, but I do need my pizza. So one more thing I want to mention is this thing called kakambal. So, in the story of Hainai, there is a being called Other Mary. I just call her Other Mary. At first, I called her like Not Mary, but then I kind of like went with Other Mary for like remaining episodes. Other Mary is Mary, but in the I have not ordered my pizza, so I'm gonna have to order it as soon as this stream is done. But Other Mary is a being that appears sort of like randomly in Hainai, where she seems to be in a jazz club. She seems to be like she has a very different tone to Mary. She's much smokier, much flirtier, much like more self-assured, and much more like sort of like a little. She's very knowing, but there are certain points in the story where she gets a little frightened. And the whole concept of Other Mary is based on a pre-colonial Tagalog belief called essentially kaluluwa and kakambal. So the Tagalog soul, the kaluluwa, can leave the body involuntarily. The kaluluwa refers more to the soul of the deceased. So the soul of a living person is called kakambal, meaning twin or double, and the kakambal may travel around at night, and some particularly bad encounters are the cause of nightmares or bangungot. The kakambal becomes a kaluluwa after death. So essentially, a kaluluwa is the soul that can leave the body involuntarily and will be the soul after death, while the kakambal is the living person's soul, but who also moves around in a dream at night. And I have reinterpreted this for Mary, in which like her sleeping soul is the kakambal, which is Other Mary, and her living soul is a kaluluwa, and her living and dying soul is kaluluwa. But one of the things Other Mary says is that there's a third thing in Mary that is not supposed to be there, and that's gonna be fun to talk about later. But yeah, like I had a lot of fun like researching so much like Tagalog mythology and folklore, and like just pre-colonial beliefs, like not just gods but also like pre-colonial beliefs, like how like sort of how each character, like how her background as a Tagalog sort of mystic character is like is what do you call it, like affects how she is in Hainai. Hainai is not necessarily about Tagalog mythology, but it is so deeply ingrained that it becomes a big part of like what people are like enjoying and learning about in the story. And I love that. Like I love talking about Hainai. I love talking about like just the general vibe of what would happen if a totally different context culturally of a character who has a totally different life, like who understands the world differently, gets placed in a position where a lot of drama can be, had from people who don't know what's going on trying to stop the supernatural. Whereas what if you have someone who knows what's going on trying to stop the supernatural, and now all of the conflicts are completely different from what you would usually have in a supernatural type show. That is why I love doing Hainai. That's why I love talking about mythology and folklore. And yeah, that's just kind of like why I did this stream, because I love mythology and folklore. And right as we are on the end, I want to say we are doing the stream to fundraise Hainai, the rest of Act 3. We would like to hit 125%, our stretch goal, so that we can make a wonderful bonus episode in which an aged immortal old man who used to be very, very evil is now trying to live life and realizes his humanity and like the concept of like being a person again when he meets a very ordinary yet warm-hearted and wonderful trans barista named Danny, and they have a wonderful, adorable little episode. If we get to our goal of 125%, we are currently at 107%. I haven't checked since the beginning of stream, so we will see when we get off the stream if it has increased. But other than that, we have it until January 31. We have a few more days, I think 26, 27, 28, 29, 31. 5 more days to get all that done. And I'm hopeful and if you are interested in this discussion that I had about mythology and how it relates to Hainai, I cover a lot of details about Tagalog mythology and folklore and monsters and like things that have inspired Hainai in one of the rewards that I did for this fundraiser, which is the Hainai Journal. At the $50 tier of the fundraiser, you can get a Hainai Journal, which is a PDF, a 20-ish page PDF explaining my process of making Hainai, its inspirations, the secrets behind Hainai, thoughts, like just general like things to learn about that I have discussed here in terms of mythology, but just in general like how Hainai was made. And if you are interested in that, go check it out. Go support Hainai. If you have any other questions, please let me know. I will spend this time waiting for questions, ordering my pizza. And I know what to do as we end this stream, but let me make sure. Let me just check my pizza real quick. Y'all can help me order my pizza. Like, what should I order? Just kidding. I know what I'm gonna order. Mascarpone. I'm just like, yeah, I'm taking the last of this like stream to order some pizza with cheese. I don't know. Sorry. No, but actually I'm not gonna do that. I am just gonna like play us out on the Hainai theme song, which Cherry Mecha says, none pizza with left beef. So true. And Cherry Mecha also says, the journal is full of great information and images. It's amazing. Exactly. Thank you, Cherry Mecha, for getting the journal. I'm so happy. And yeah, like, please tell more people about Hainai and its fundraiser so we can get to 125% before January 31. And make sure to get the bonus episode for everybody. But we will be returning on February 2 with a very exciting episode about Donner and Murphy, some of our main characters. And if you want to learn more about Hainai, you can find us on all podcast platforms. We are under the Rusty Quill Network, inspired by the Magnus Archives, but doing our own very cultural thing. And we're really excited to come back. I'll play us out on the theme song of Hainai, which actually, the theme song comes from, it's, originally played for Hainai, but this was where it came from. And for those of you who aren't aware, the theme song of Hainai is called Ili Ili Tulog Anay. And it is a Bisaya lullaby about, it's about a mother who's not there. And it was very thematic for Hainai because Mary is calling her nanay about what's happening with her because she is not with her. So Ili Ili Tulog Anay is Bisaya, and it means like sleep well, little one, your mother is not here. Like, that's kind of the lyrics. Ili Ili Tulog Anay, wala diri iyong nanay. And it basically says like she's out buying food, and when she comes back you will help her with the groceries. It's very like sweet and innocent, but the way it's sung can be very haunting and creepy. And I found this wonderful recording of by a wonderful artist, a musician in the Philippines named Monching Carpio, who is a classical guitarist, and he did Ili Tulog Ka Na Yon Kalimba, and I liked it so much that I asked him, can I use it as a theme song? And then later I asked him, can I commission you to perform this so that I can use it as a theme song, like basically all. So that was the first amount of money I spent on Hainai. I spent like $100 to like pay him, and yeah, I'll play it right now. I'm gonna switch over to the window in which it is. Make sure that the sound is playing. Make sure that the desktop audio is playing. Look at that, all of the technical things. This is Monching Carpio's Ili Ili Tulog Anay. Let me just also make sure that it is transformed to fit the screen. There it is. Here we go. Very simple yet perfect for Hainai, and that is something I'm very happy with that we chose, because now the theme song like gets people into what Hainai is as a show. So I'm gonna start saying goodbye, everybody. I'm just gonna wrap up this stream. We are 2 minutes off, but I'm gonna say good night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for both streams. For those of you who were able to, or at least this one, I started streaming at 1 p.m. today, and it's now almost 6 p.m. So yeah, I'm gonna enjoy my pizza. I'm gonna enjoy my rest. And I am so grateful to everyone who joined in. I am really happy to be able to do this sort of thing. I am really grateful to everyone who supported the fundraiser, who has been supporting Hainai in ways like in both like just fundraising, but also just in talking about Hainai and spreading the word, in showing enthusiasm, in chatting in the Discord, in, you know, just talking about like your favorite things about Hainai, doing fan art, doing that one animatic that was just really, I really love. Everyone's just been amazing, and it makes me always feel that Hainai is worth doing. So I really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Good night, Cherry Mecha. Good night, Fractal Fan Alex. Good night, Chai Magpie. Good night, Ella, as well, because you thank you for staying on the stream even after like ending the call, because like, you know, thank you for chatting in the stream. It's been awesome. Oh, and Ella said, so interested in what the third thing is, and Cherry Mecha says, a secret third thing, I can't wait. Right, it is a secret third thing. That's so funny. I didn't even think about that. But yeah, anyway, good night. Maraming salamat, which I say all the time. It means thank you so much. Maraming salamat. Many, many thanks is literally what it means. At ingat, which is be careful. That's how Filipinos say bye, by the way. Ingat. Careful. It's a threat. You better be careful. You better watch yourself. Ingat. Bye, everyone. Good night. Salamat. Bye.